The orphan train hissed to a stop under the merciless Wyoming sun, and 12-year-old Lydia Hale watched from the back row as families walked the platform, pointing, choosing, taking everyone but her. 3 towns, 17 children selected, and still, she sat with her small cloth bag clutched to her chest, invisible as always. When the conductor called final boarding and no one stepped forward, she felt the familiar sting behind her eyes and whispered the truth she'd carried since Boston. Nobody ever picks me. Then a voice cut through the dust in disappointment, low, steady, unshakable. Her. I'll take her. Lydia's head snapped up. A tall man stood at the edge of the platform, weathered hands resting easy at his sides, eyes holding something she didn't recognize. Choice. His name was Jonah Ryder, and he just changed everything. If you want to see how Lydia's story unfolds, how one quiet cowboy's decision transformed an unwanted orphan into the heart of a frontier family, stay with me until the very end. And when you do, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The wooden bench bit into Lydia's thin shoulders as the train lurched forward one last time before settling into silence. Through the smudged window, she watched the town of Redemption Creek spread out in shades of brown and gray, buildings that leaned slightly westward from years of prairie wind, a church steeple that needed paint, dirt streets that turned to mud with the first good rain. It looked like every other town she'd seen from this same seat. She didn't bother standing when Matron Holloway walked down the aisle with her clipboard and her pinched expression. The other children, the ones who remained, pressed their faces to the windows, hope still bright in their eyes. Lydia had learned better. "Straighten up," Matron Holloway said sharply, pausing beside Lydia's seat. "You look like you've already given up." "Haven't I?" Lydia's voice came out smaller than she intended. The matron's mouth thinned. "A grateful child would show more enthusiasm." Grateful. The word sat bitter on Lydia's tongue. Grateful for what? For being loaded onto a train like livestock after her mother died? For being paraded through town after town while families chose the pretty ones, the strong ones, the ones who smiled bright enough to hide their fear? She was none of those things. She was small for 12, quiet in a way that made adults uncomfortable, and she had a habit of watching instead of performing. In Boston, her mother had called it thoughtful. Here, it just made her forgettable. "We're disembarking in 5 minutes," Matron Holloway announced to the car. "Remember your manners, stand straight, smile. These good people are offering you homes." The children filed out into the brutal afternoon heat. Lydia took her place at the end of the line, her cloth bag clutched against her chest. Inside were the only things she owned: her mother's silver thimble, a worn copy of Little Women, and a faded blue ribbon that still smelled faintly of lavender. The platform was crowded. Families clustered in small groups, the women in calico and sunbonnets, the men in dusty work clothes and broad-brimmed hats. They studied the children with the same calculating look Lydia had seen farmers use when buying horses, checking teeth, assessing strength, measuring value. A stout woman in black claimed the first boy, a sturdy 10-year-old who'd told jokes the entire train ride. A younger couple took twin girls who sang hymns in perfect harmony. One by one, the children stepped forward, were claimed, and disappeared into their new lives. Lydia stood perfectly still, making herself small. It was a trick she'd learned. If she didn't draw attention, didn't meet anyone's eyes, didn't hope too hard, then the rejection hurt less when it came. "What about that one?" A woman's voice drifted over the crowd. Lydia's heart jumped before she could stop it. She glanced up. The woman was pointing at Sarah Miller, a bright-eyed 11-year-old with blonde braids and dimples. "Oh, she's precious," the woman cooed, and Sarah beamed as she was led away. The sun beat down. Sweat trickled between Lydia's shoulder blades. The crowd thinned. "Last call," the conductor announced, pulling his pocket watch from his vest. "Train departs in 10 minutes. 4 children remained, then 3. Then just Lydia and a boy named Thomas, who coughed constantly and had eyes that looked too old for his face. "I'll take the boy," a gruff farmer said. "Looks like he could use regular meals." Thomas shot Lydia a quick, apologetic glance before following his new owner toward a wagon. And then she was alone. Matron Holloway's heels clicked across the platform. Her face was tight with barely concealed frustration. Well, she said, not quite looking at Lydia, I suppose we'll try again at the next stop. The next stop. The words hit like a fist. Another town, another platform, another line of rejection. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. Sorry doesn't feed mouths or find homes, the matron snapped. She turned away, already done with the conversation. Back on the train, quickly now. Lydia's feet felt rooted to the sun-bleached boards. This was it then. This was her life. An endless series of platforms, of being passed over, of not quite measuring up. The unfairness of it swelled in her chest until she thought she might choke on it. She took one step toward the train. Hold on. The voice was quiet, but it carried, deep, steady. The kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. Lydia turned. A man stood at the edge of the platform, partially shadowed by the overhang of the general store. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean, weathered build that came from years of hard work under an unforgiving sun. His face was angular, tanned dark, with lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted into wind and distance more often than he smiled. He wore dusty work clothes, a hat that had seen better days, and boots that were scuffed and worn but well-maintained. But it was his eyes that caught Lydia. They were a clear, startling gray, the color of storm clouds over the prairie, and they were looking directly at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. The train leaving? He asked the conductor, his gaze never shifting from Lydia's face. In about 8 minutes, Mr. Ryder, the conductor replied, with a note of respect in his voice. Unless you've got business with it. The man, Ryder, tilted his head slightly, still studying Lydia with that unnerving directness. That girl spoken for? Matron Holloway stepped forward, surprise evident in her voice. Lydia? No, she hasn't been placed yet. Her? Ryder's voice was flat, certain. I'll take her. The platform went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. She stared at the stranger who'd just claimed her with the casual certainty most men used to order coffee. Mr. Ryder, Matron Holloway began, her tone careful. Are you certain? She's rather... that is, she's not the most robust child, and... I'm certain. He stepped fully into the sunlight now, and Lydia saw he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, though the sun and wind had aged him. Unless the girl objects. All eyes turned to Lydia. Her mouth had gone dry. This man was a complete stranger. She knew nothing about him, except that he had a good reputation with the railroad conductor and that he'd chosen her when no one else had. When no one else ever had. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I don't object. Something that might have been approval flickered across Ryder's face. Good. What's your name? Lydia. Lydia Hale. Lydia. He tested the name, gave a single nod. I'm Jonah Ryder. I run a ranch about 5 miles west of town. It's simple living, 1-room cabin, barn, few head of cattle. I won't lie to you about that. But you'll have a roof, regular meals, and nobody will mistreat you. That acceptable? It was the strangest proposal Lydia had ever heard. No false promises of a loving family, no talk of needing help with younger children or farm chores, just the plain facts, delivered without embellishment. She found it oddly reassuring. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir, Jonah's fine. He turned to Matron Holloway. What paperwork needs signing? The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of signatures and official stamps. Matron Holloway pulled Lydia aside while Jonah completed the forms. Do you understand what's happening? The matron asked, her voice lower now, almost concerned. You're being indentured to Mr. Ryder until you turn 18. That's 6 years of service. I understand. He could work you very hard. Ranch life is demanding. I'm not afraid of work. Matron Holloway studied her for a long moment, then sighed. No, I don't suppose you are. You've always been a peculiar child, Lydia Hale. Too quiet, too watchful. Perhaps a quiet man suits you better than a bustling family would have. She handed over Lydia's bag. Try to make this one work. There won't be many more chances. Lydia took the bag, its familiar weight grounding her. I will. When the paperwork was complete, Jonah led her to a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He placed her bag in the back with the same care he might give valuable cargo.
This story was
then offered his
posted on the
hand to help
channel
her
The
up to
Rusty
seat.
Saddle.
His
Please
palm
do
was
not
calloused,
repost it in any
rough from
form.
years of rope and leather, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. "You eat today?" he asked as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Some bread this morning. We'll stop for supplies. You can pick out something you like." The wagon rolled forward. Lydia watched the platform recede behind them, Matron Holloway's disapproving figure growing smaller. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something other than dread settle in her chest. Curiosity, maybe. Or the faint, fragile beginning of hope. The general store smelled of coffee, leather, and dried herbs. Jonah moved through it with efficient purpose, selecting flour, salt, coffee beans, a side of bacon. He paused by the candy jars and glanced at Lydia. "Pick one." She blinked. "What?" "A treat. Pick one." When she hesitated, he added, "Not a trick, just a welcome." Lydia studied the jars, peppermint sticks, lemon drops, licorice twists. She chose the lemon drops because they reminded her of something her mother used to buy on special occasions. Jonah bought a quarter-pound and handed her the small paper sack. "Those will last you a while if you're smart about it." At the counter, the proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, glanced between Jonah and Lydia. "Heard you took one of the orphans, Ryder. News travels fast. Always does." The man's gaze lingered on Lydia in a way that made her skin prickle. Unusual choice for a single man. Jonah's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle straightening, a slight squaring of shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was pleasant, but edged with steel. "Not much choice involved. Saw a child who needed a home. Had a home that needed filling. Seemed practical. Still, people might talk." "People always talk, Henry. Usually about things that aren't their concern." Jonah placed coins on the counter with deliberate precision. "My business is my own, same as always." The proprietor had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Didn't mean any offense." "None taken, long as we're clear." Jonah gathered the supplies and gestured for Lydia to follow. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, painting the storefronts in shades of amber. Lydia climbed back onto the wagon seat, her mind turning over the exchange she'd just witnessed. "Why did you choose me?" The question escaped before she could think better of it. Jonah settled beside her, considered the reins in his hands. "You want the complicated answer or the simple one?" "The true one." That almost smile flickered across his face again. "Fair enough." He clicked his tongue and the horses moved forward. "Simple truth is, I saw a kid who'd been passed over. Reminded me of something." "Of what?" "Being the one nobody picked." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "I was 15 when my folks died. Cholera. Had some distant relatives who were supposed to take me in, but they found reasons not to. Spent 2 years working whatever jobs I could find, sleeping in barns, going hungry more often than not. Finally saved enough to head west and stake my own claim." Lydia absorbed this, understanding blooming in her chest. "So, you know what it feels like?" "I do." He glanced at her then, those gray eyes direct and honest. "Figured if I could give one kid a different outcome, might as well. You seemed like you had some spine underneath all that quiet. Thought that was worth something." Nobody had ever told Lydia she had spine before. The words settled into her like seeds planted in good soil. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically, the prairie stretching endlessly on either side. The land was beautiful in its starkness, rolling grassland that shifted from gold to green to brown depending on the light, scattered with wildflowers that added unexpected splashes of color. In the distance, a line of cottonwoods marked where a creek ran. "That's the property line," Jonah said, pointing to the trees. "We run about 300 acres. Not huge, but it's good grazing land. Water year-round from Willow Creek." "What do you ranch?" "Cattle mostly, some horses. Had a notion to try sheep a few years back, but decided against it. Cattle are ornery enough." He gestured ahead. "House is just past that rise." The cabin came into view as they crested a small hill. It was simple, as he'd promised. Rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney, a small porch with a roof that sagged slightly on one side. The barn was nearby, larger than the house and in better repair. A corral held several horses, and beyond that, Lydia could see cattle dotting the landscape. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in years. Jonah pulled the wagon to a stop near the cabin and jumped down. He unhitched the horses with practiced efficiency, then gathered the supplies. "Come on, I'll show you around before it gets dark." The cabin's interior was Spartan but clean. One large room served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat near the window, and a single bed frame with a corn husk mattress occupied the far corner. Shelves held basic supplies, cooking implements, a few books. Lydia stood in the doorway, taking it in. "I know it's not fancy," Jonah said, setting the supplies on the table, "but it's sound. Roof doesn't leak, walls keep out the wind, fireplace draws good. Where do you sleep?" "Barn. It's comfortable enough." She turned to stare at him. "The barn?" "Has a loft. I built a decent bunk up there years ago. Honestly prefer it sometimes. Closer to the animals if something goes wrong at night." He must have seen the protest forming on her face because he added, "Lydia, I'm not giving up anything. This is how I want it arranged. You're a child. You get the house. I'm a grown man who spends most of his time outdoors anyway. The barn suits me fine." "But no arguments." "That's how it's going to be." His tone was gentle but firm. "Now, you hungry? I can make some supper." They ate pan-fried bacon, beans, and cornbread that Jonah admitted he'd made that morning. It was simple food, but after weeks of thin orphanage gruel, it tasted like luxury to Lydia. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. "You cook?" Jonah asked. "Some. My mother taught me before she—" Lydia's throat tightened. She still couldn't say the word died without feeling like the ground might open beneath her. "Before she passed," Jonah finished quietly. "That's all right. No need to explain. You know basic cooking. That's useful. I can teach you what I know, which admittedly isn't fancy, but it keeps a person fed. You'll learn ranch work too if you're willing. Tends to be easier if you understand how everything runs." "I'm willing to learn." "Good." He poured coffee for himself, milk for her. "Few rules you should know. First, you pull your weight, but I'm not going to work you to death. You're a kid, and you need time to be one. Second, you're honest with me. I'll be honest with you. Don't like games or lies. Third, you've got questions or problems. You bring them to me. Don't let things fester." Lydia nodded, committing each rule to memory. "And fourth," Jonah continued, his expression serious now, "if anyone, and I mean anyone, mistreats you or makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. I don't care who it is. Understood?" "Understood." They cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised Lydia. Jonah washed, she dried. He showed her where things belonged, explained his simple system for organizing supplies. When full darkness fell, he lit a lantern and set it on the table. "You'll want to settle in, I expect. There's a trunk under the bed. It was my mother's. Empty now. You can use it for your things." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Outhouse is about 20 yards behind the cabin. Pumps on the back porch for washing up. If you need anything during the night and I'm not around, there's a bell on the porch. Ring it, and I'll hear from the barn." "Jonah?" Lydia's voice was small in the lamplit room. He turned back. "Thank you for choosing me." Something shifted in his weathered features, a softening around the eyes, a barely perceptible relaxation of the jaw. "Get some rest, Lydia. Tomorrow's soon enough to start worrying about earning your keep." After he left, Lydia changed into her nightgown and knelt beside the bed to arrange her few possessions in the trunk. Her mother's thimble caught the lamplight, winking silver. She held it for a moment, remembering gentle hands guiding hers through her first awkward stitches. "You have to be patient with yourself," her mother had said. "Good things take time to build." Lydia climbed into bed, the corn husk mattress rustling beneath her. Through the single window, she could see stars scattered across the vast prairie sky. More stars than she'd ever seen in Boston, bright and cold and impossibly distant. For the first time in months, she didn't cry herself to sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Gray dawn light filtered through the window. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The platform, Jonah's voice, the wagon ride. This small cabin that was somehow, impossibly, now her home. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Jonah at the pump, washing his face. He looked up as she approached.
This story was posted on the
Morning.
channel The
Sleep
Rusty
all
Saddle.
right?
Please do
Yes,
not
sir.
repost it in any
She caught
form.
herself. Jonah. Good. Breakfast is ready when you are. After that, I'll show you the basics around here. Nothing too demanding on your first day. They fell into a routine over the following days that felt both strange and natural. Jonah woke before dawn and tended to the animals while Lydia started breakfast. They ate together, then he'd take her through the day's tasks, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, checking fence lines, learning to recognize when cattle were sick or injured. He was patient in a way Lydia hadn't expected. When she struggled to saddle a horse properly, he showed her 3 times without a hint of frustration. When she accidentally let the chickens out of their coop, he simply helped her round them up and explained how to secure the latch better. Making mistakes is how you learn, he said simply. Long as you don't make the same one twice, we're fine. In the evenings, after supper, Jonah would read by lamplight, mostly agricultural journals and the occasional newspaper from town, while Lydia worked on mending or practiced her letters. Sometimes he'd ask her to read aloud from one of the 3 books on his shelf, saying it had been a while since he'd heard anyone else's voice in the cabin. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Lydia first asked about the town. Do people come out here often? To visit, I mean. Jonah glanced up from his journal. Not particularly. I head into Redemption Creek once a month for supplies and to settle accounts. Sometimes neighbors stop by if they need help with something, or if there's a barn raising or such, but mostly people keep to themselves out here. Don't you get lonely? He considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but I prefer honest solitude to dishonest company. Most folks in town are good people, but there are some who like to make other people's business their own. I've never had patience for that. Lydia thought of the store proprietor's suspicious questions, the way his eyes had lingered on her. Is that why that man in the store was asking about me? Henry? Jonah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Henry's a gossip, likes to stir the pot. Best ignored. But over the next few weeks, Lydia began to understand that Henry wasn't alone in his suspicions. When they went to town for supplies, she noticed the looks. Women whispering behind their hands, men watching Jonah with narrowed eyes. The proprietor of the dry goods store asked pointed questions about Lydia's sleeping arrangements. The blacksmith made a comment about the unusual situation that made Jonah's face go hard as granite. People will talk, Jonah told her on the ride home, his hands tight on the reins. Let them. As long as you know the truth, that's what matters. But Lydia could see it bothered him more than he admitted, and she understood why. She'd grown up in Boston, where reputation was everything, where a whisper could destroy a person faster than any scandal. It came to a head 5 weeks after Lydia's arrival. She was in the cabin, practicing her arithmetic from an old primer Jonah had found in town, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Through the window, she saw a man on horseback, tall, wearing a sheriff's badge that caught the afternoon sun. Lydia's stomach clenched. She recognized authority when she saw it, and authority had never meant anything good in her experience. Jonah emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his work pants. He and the sheriff spoke for several minutes, their voices too low for Lydia to hear clearly, but she could read the tension in Jonah's posture, the aggressive lean of the sheriff's body. Finally, Jonah's voice rose enough for her to catch words. My legal right, paperwork is in order. The sheriff's response was loud and clear. Law's one thing, Ryder. Propriety's another. A single man raising a young girl? People have concerns. People can mind their own business. Can't ignore the talk. I've been ignoring talk my whole life. Works fine. Lydia moved closer to the window, her heart pounding. The sheriff's face had gone red, and she could see Jonah's hands had curled into fists at his sides, not threatening, but ready. I'm not here to make trouble, the sheriff said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Just delivering a friendly warning. Some folks think this situation isn't appropriate, that maybe the girl would be better off in a more traditional family setting. The girl has a name. It's Lydia, and she's got a home, which is more than she had 6 weeks ago. Jonah's voice was quiet now, but it carried a weight that made the sheriff shift in his saddle. Unless you're here with an official complaint and a judge's order, I'd appreciate you getting off my land. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You always were stubborn, Ryder. And you always were more concerned with what people thought than what was right, Caleb. The use of the sheriff's first name seemed to strike a nerve. The sheriff's face darkened. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Jonah stepped closer to the horse, and though he didn't raise his voice, something in his bearing made the animal sidestep nervously. You want to come back? You bring official papers. Otherwise, you stay off my property. We clear? For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then the sheriff wheeled his horse around and rode off, dust rising in his wake. Jonah stood watching until the rider disappeared over the rise, then turned toward the cabin. His expression was carefully neutral, but Lydia could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. She met him at the door. What did he want? Jonah removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. Caleb Thorne. We've got history, him and me. He's been looking for an excuse to come at me for years. Seems he's found one. Me? Lydia's voice was flat. No. His prejudice is his own problem, not yours. Jonah hung his hat on the peg by the door. But I won't lie to you. There are people in town who don't approve of this arrangement. Caleb's just the loudest voice in that choir. What are we going to do? We? Jonah looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression softened. We're going to keep doing exactly what we've been doing, living our lives, hurting nobody, and not letting other people's small-mindedness dictate our choices. But Lydia could see the worry he was trying to hide. She'd learned to read him over these weeks, the way he got quiet when he was troubled, how his hands would still when he was thinking hard about something. That night, she lay in bed listening to the prairie wind and wondering what would happen if the sheriff came back, if he brought official papers, if he tried to take her away from this place that had started to feel like home. The thought made her chest tight with panic. She'd been chosen for the first time in her life. She'd found someone who saw her, who valued her, who treated her with quiet respect. She couldn't lose it, not now, not when she'd just started to believe that maybe, possibly, she might actually belong somewhere. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Somewhere in the barn, Jonah was probably still awake, wrestling with the same fears. And in town, Sheriff Caleb Thorne sat in his office, staring at a blank piece of paper, and considered exactly how to word the complaint that would solve his Jonah Ryder problem once and for all. The storm was coming. They both knew it. The only question was how hard it would hit, and whether they'd still be standing when it passed. The days that followed the sheriff's visit moved with deceptive calm, like the stillness before a summer thunderstorm. Jonah went about his work with the same steady determination, but Lydia noticed the way his eyes tracked the horizon more often, the way he kept his rifle closer when he worked near the house. She didn't ask questions. She'd learned that Jonah spoke when he was ready, not when pressed. Instead, she threw herself into learning everything he'd teach her. How to read the sky for weather changes. How to tell when a fence post was rotting from the inside. How to approach a skittish horse without triggering its flight instinct. Every skill felt like armor, like something that might make her valuable enough to keep. On the fourth morning after the sheriff's visit, Jonah found her in the chicken coop before dawn, already collecting eggs. You're up early, he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Couldn't sleep. Lydia placed another egg carefully in her basket. Figured I might as well be useful. Jonah was quiet for a moment. You worried about Caleb coming back? She met his eyes. Aren't you? Some. He stepped into the coop, took the basket from her hands, and set it aside. Sit down a minute. We need to talk. They sat on overturned crates, the chickens clucking softly around them in the pre-dawn dimness. The smell of hay and feathers hung thick in the air. I've been thinking, Jonah began, his voice measured, about what Caleb said, about people's concerns. Lydia's stomach dropped. You're sending me back. What? No. Jonah looked genuinely startled. That's not... Lydia, no. I'm not sending you anywhere, but I need you to understand something. Caleb Thorne isn't just a busybody with too much time on his hands. He's got real authority, and if he decides to push this, he can make trouble for us both. What kind of trouble? The kind where he gets a judge involved, claims I'm unfit to care for you, takes you away and puts you with a family he deems more appropriate. Jonah's jaw tightened. Or sends you back to an orphanage. The words hit like physical blows. Lydia wrapped her arms around herself. Can he do that? Even with the paperwork being legal? Law's a funny thing out here. It's supposed to be about right and wrong, but mostly it's about who has power and who knows how to use it. Caleb's got the badge, he's got the town's ear, and he's got a
This
personal
story
grudge
was
against me
posted
that
on the
goes
channel
back
The
years.
Rusty Saddle. Please do
Why?
not repost it in
What
any
happened
form.
between you two? Jonah exhaled slowly. When I first came to Redemption Creek, I was about 17, angry at the world, carrying a chip on my shoulder the size of Montana. Got into a fight with Caleb over something stupid. Think it was a card game or maybe a girl. Can't even remember now. But I broke his nose, and he never forgot it. He shook his head. We've been circling each other like wolves ever since. He became sheriff about 5 years back, and he's been waiting for an excuse to take me down a peg. And I'm the excuse. You're the excuse he's using, but make no mistake, this is about him and me, not about what's best for you. Jonah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Here's what I'm thinking. We keep our heads down. Don't give him any ammunition. You and we're careful about appearances when we go to town. We make sure people see that this is exactly what it is. A man giving a kid a fair chance, nothing more, nothing less. And if that's not enough, then we fight. The steel in his voice was unmistakable. I've got legal papers. I've got a decent reputation with most folks, even if Caleb doesn't like me. And I've got neighbors who owe me favors. If it comes to it, we make Caleb prove his case in front of a judge, and we make damn sure the judge sees the truth. Lydia studied his face in the growing light. You'd really fight for me, even though you barely know me? I know enough. Jonah stood, picked up the egg basket. I know you're smart and tough, and you deserve better than being shuffled around like an unwanted package. I know you work hard and you don't complain, and I know that if I let Caleb Thorne bully me into giving up on you, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. He offered her his hand. Come on. Sun's almost up and there's work to do. Best way to fight trouble is to not let it stop you from living. They fell back into their routine, but the threat hung over them like gathering clouds. 3 weeks passed with no sign of the sheriff, and Lydia began to hope that maybe he'd moved on to other concerns. Then, on a blistering afternoon in late July, a wagon rolled up the road carrying a woman Lydia had never seen before. She was perhaps 40, dressed in a severe gray dress, buttoned to her throat despite the heat. Her hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. She climbed down from the wagon with precise, disapproving movements and surveyed the property with the air of someone cataloging deficiencies. Jonah emerged from the barn, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Hartwell. Unexpected visit. Mr. Ryder. The woman's voice was crisp as winter ice. I'm here in my capacity as head of the Ladies' Aid Society. We've received concerns about the welfare of the child you've taken in. Have you now? It wasn't a question. Jonah wiped his hands on his work pants and waited. Mrs. Hartwell's gaze swept past him to where Lydia stood on the cabin porch, frozen with a dish rag still in her hands. The child appears adequately clothed, at least, though I notice she's wearing trousers. Easier for ranch work than a dress. Precisely the point. A young lady should be learning domestic arts, not manual labor. She's learning both. Jonah's voice remained even, but Lydia could see tension creeping into his shoulders. Cooking, mending, keeping house. Also fence repair, animal care, and basic ranch management. Seems useful to know how to take care of yourself in this world. Mrs. Hartwell's mouth pursed. I'd like to speak with the child. Alone. No. The single word dropped like a stone into still water. Mrs. Hartwell's eyebrows shot up. I beg your pardon? You can speak with Lydia right here, with me present, or you can leave. Jonah crossed his arms. Those are your options. I am conducting an official welfare check on behalf of... You're conducting gossip collection on behalf of Caleb Thorne, who put you up to this because he's too much of a coward to come back himself. Jonah's voice was still quiet, but it cut like a blade. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. Mrs. Hartwell's face flushed. How dare you? How dare I what? Protect a child from being interrogated by someone with a predetermined conclusion? How dare I insist on transparency when people are trying to undermine a legal arrangement? He took a step forward, and Mrs. Hartwell actually stepped back. You want to check on Lydia's welfare? Fine. Ask your questions. But you do it where I can hear, and you do it respectfully, or you get off my land. For a moment, the standoff held. Then Mrs. Hartwell drew herself up with rigid dignity and turned toward Lydia. "Child, are you being treated well?" Lydia's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you have adequate food and shelter?" "Yes, ma'am." "Has Mr. Ryder that is, has he behaved inappropriately toward you in any way?" Lydia felt anger flare hot in her chest. "No, never. Jonah's been nothing but kind and respectful." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes narrowed. "You call him by his Christian name?" "He asked me to." "Highly irregular." The woman produced a small notebook from her reticule and made a notation. "And where do you sleep?" "In the cabin." "And Mr. Ryder?" "The barn. He gave me the cabin and took the barn for himself." Lydia stepped down from the porch, the dish rag still clutched in her hand like a weapon. "He works hard. He treats me fair. And he's teaching me things nobody else ever bothered to. If people have concerns, maybe they should concern themselves with why nobody wanted me before Jonah did, instead of trying to ruin the one good thing that's happened to me." The words hung in the heated air. Mrs. Hartwell's face had gone from flushed to pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well," she said finally, "you certainly have opinions." "I have truth." Lydia's hands were shaking, but she kept her chin up. "And the truth is, I was nobody's first choice. I was the last kid on that platform, and if Jonah hadn't spoken up, I'd be on my way to the next town, getting passed over again. So forgive me if I'm not real sympathetic to people who suddenly care about my welfare now that I've actually got a home." Jonah made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Mrs. Hartwell looked between them, her expression torn between outrage and something that might have been grudging respect. "I see." She tucked her notebook away with sharp, precise movements. "I will be filing my report with Sheriff Thorne." "You do that," Jonah said. "And when you do, you tell him that everything here is legal, proper, and none of his business. Tell him, if he wants to come at me again, he'd better bring a judge and a damn good reason." Mrs. Hartwell climbed back into her wagon without another word. They watched her drive away, dust rising in her wake. When she was out of sight, Jonah turned to Lydia. "That was well said." "I meant it." "I know you did. That's what made it powerful." He studied her face. "You all right?" Lydia realized she was trembling, adrenaline still flooding her system. "I'm angry." "Good. Anger's useful, long as you don't let it make you stupid." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come on, let's get some coffee and cool down before we do something we'll regret." They sat at the small kitchen table, coffee cups between them, the afternoon heat pressing against the walls. Outside, the cicadas sang their relentless summer song. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" Lydia asked quietly. "Probably not. Not until Caleb gets what he wants or gives up trying." Jonah turned his cup slowly, watching the coffee swirl. "Question is, what's he really after? He can't actually believe you're in danger here. He's not stupid, just vindictive." "Maybe he wants you to fight back. Give him a reason to arrest you." Jonah's eyes sharpened. "That's actually a smart observation. Get me angry enough to throw a punch, haul me off to jail, take you away while I'm locked up." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that'd work for him." "So what do we do?" "We don't give him that satisfaction. We keep our tempers, we stay within the law, and we make sure there are witnesses to everything." Jonah drained his coffee. "And we find ourselves some allies. I've been too solitary for too long. Time to remind some folks that they owe me favors." Over the next week, Jonah made good on that promise. He rode out to neighboring ranches, had quiet conversations with men who'd borrowed tools or received help during difficult times. He stopped by the church social, something Lydia learned he hadn't done in years, and made a point of introducing her around, letting people see for themselves that she was healthy, well cared for, and content. Most people were kind. A few were coolly polite. But the whispers continued, and Lydia could feel them like insects crawling on her skin. It was at the church social that she met Emma Whitmore, a girl about her age with wild red hair and a spray of freckles across her nose. Emma approached while Lydia was helping serve lemonade, her expression friendly and curious. "You're the girl staying with Mr. Ryder," she said without preamble. Lydia braced herself for judgment. "I am." "Must be interesting learning ranch work. My pa says Mr. Ryder's one of the best horsemen in the county." Emma leaned closer, lowering her voice. My ma says the whole situation is scandalous, but my pa told her she was being ridiculous, and that Jonah
This
Ryder's
story
got
was
more
posted on the
integrity in
channel
his
The
little
Rusty
finger
Saddle.
than most
Please
men
do
have in
not
their whole
repost it in
bodies.
any form.
They had a big fight about it. Despite herself, Lydia smiled. Who won? Pa, eventually. He usually does when he's right. Emma grabbed 2 cookies from the dessert table. Want to sit? I'll tell you who everyone is so you know who to avoid. They found a spot under a cottonwood tree, and Emma proved to be an excellent guide to Redemption Creek's social landscape. She pointed out families, explained alliances and feuds, and had a wickedly accurate read on people's characters. That's Mr. Chen. He runs the laundry. Nicest man you'll ever meet. His wife makes these amazing sweet buns. And there's the Kowalski family. They're Polish, been here about 3 years. Good people, but they keep to themselves mostly. Emma gestured toward a cluster of well-dressed women. That's Mrs. Hartwell's crew. The Ladies' Aid Society, though Pa calls them the Busybody Brigade. They mean well mostly, but they've got some fixed ideas about how things should be. Mrs. Hartwell came to inspect me last week. Emma's eyes went wide. Did she? What did you do? Told her the truth, that Jonah treats me well, and I'm grateful to be there. Bet that went over like a lead balloon. Emma grinned. Good for you, Mrs. Hartwell needs someone to stand up to her occasionally. She runs most things in town, and not everyone's happy about it. As the afternoon wore on, Lydia found herself relaxing. Emma was easy to talk to, undemanding, and genuinely interested. They discovered shared interests, both loved reading, both had lost their mothers young, both felt like outsiders in their own ways. My hair, Emma explained, tugging at a red curl. Kids used to say I looked like a barn fire, and I'm too tall and too loud and too much of everything, according to my aunts. She shrugged. But Pa says there's nothing wrong with taking up space in the world, and I figure he's probably right. When it was time to leave, Emma grabbed Lydia's hand. You should come to the Saturday market next week. I'll introduce you to some other kids. Not everyone in town is awful, I promise. I'd like that. On the ride home, Jonah glanced over at her. Made a friend? Maybe. Emma Whitmore. Her father's the one with the horse ranch east of town. Tom Whitmore. Good man. Helped me out when I was first getting established. Jonah nodded approvingly. Emma's a good kid. Smart. Not afraid to speak her mind. Sounds like someone else I know, Lydia said, and was rewarded with one of Jonah's rare, genuine smiles. But the peace was short-lived. 2 days later, Jonah came back from town with his face set in hard lines and a paper clutched in his fist. Lydia was hanging laundry when she saw him ride in fast, his horse lathered and breathing hard. He dismounted in one smooth motion and strode toward her with the paper extended. Read this. It was a notice, official-looking with an embossed seal at the top. Lydia's eyes skimmed over the formal language until she reached the heart of it. Hereby required to appear before Judge Malcolm Hendricks on the 15th day of August, 1884, to address concerns regarding the welfare and proper placement of the minor child Lydia Hale, currently residing under the guardianship of Mr. Jonah Ryder. He's actually doing it, Lydia whispered. He's taking us to court. He is. Jonah took the paper back, folded it with deliberate care. Which means we've got 3 weeks to prepare. We're going to need testimony from character witnesses. We're going to need to show that you're thriving, not just surviving. And we're going to need to make damn sure that Judge sees through Caleb's personal vendetta to the truth underneath. What if the judge sides with him? Jonah was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Then we cross that bridge when we come to it. But I'm not giving up without a fight, Lydia. I made you a promise when I took you off that platform. I don't break my promises. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Jonah consulted with a lawyer in the next town over, a sharp-eyed man named Frederick Morse, who listened to their story and agreed to represent them. Mr. Morse interviewed Lydia extensively, asked her detailed questions about her daily life, her treatment, her feelings about the arrangement. The judge will want to hear from you, Mr. Morse explained. You're old enough to have an opinion on your own welfare. If you can speak clearly and honestly about your situation, it will carry weight. Tom Whitmore stopped by the ranch to offer his support. I'll testify if you need me, he told Jonah. Anyone with eyes can see that girl's better off with you than she'd be shuffled into some family that wants free labor. Other neighbors came forward too. The blacksmith who'd made the pointed comment weeks earlier showed up with an apology and an offer to speak on Jonah's behalf. I was out of line, he admitted. Listened to gossip instead of thinking for myself. Won't happen again. Even Mr. Chen from the laundry came by with his wife, bearing sweet buns and a carefully written statement attesting to Jonah's good character and Lydia's obvious well-being whenever they'd seen her in town. Community matters, Mrs. Chen said in her accented English. When good people attacked, community must stand up. The support steadied something in Jonah that Lydia hadn't realized was wavering. She saw it in the way his shoulders relaxed slightly, the way the hard lines around his mouth softened when neighbors offered their help. But there were also those who sided with the sheriff. Mrs. Hartwell made her position clear, as did several other prominent families. The town was dividing, lines being drawn, and Lydia hated that she was the cause of it. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the cabin floor, her mind churning with worry. What if she said the wrong thing? What if the judge didn't believe her? What if Jonah lost the ranch trying to fight for her? Finally, she got up and walked outside. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. She found Jonah sitting on the porch steps, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Couldn't sleep either? He asked without turning around. She sat beside him. Too much thinking. Yeah, I know that feeling. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced. Cold. Should have brought the pot. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, cattle lowing in the distance, the whisper of wind through grass, an owl calling from the cottonwoods by the creek. Jonah? Lydia's voice was small. What happens if we lose? We won't. But what if shit? We won't. He set down the cup and turned to face her. Lydia, listen to me. I've spent my whole life being underestimated. People look at me and see a loner, a man with a chip on his shoulder and no real ties to anyone. They think that makes me weak, but you know what it actually makes me? What? Free. Free to fight without worrying about what people think. Free to stand my ground because I've got nothing to lose except what matters. He reached out and gently turned her face toward him. You matter. Not because you work hard or because you're useful. Because you're a kid who deserves a fair shake, and I'm the stubborn bastard who decided to give it to you. That's not changing, no matter what Caleb Thorne or Judge Hendricks or anyone else says. Tears burned in Lydia's eyes. I don't want you to lose everything because of me. You're not taking anything from me. You're giving me purpose I didn't even know I was missing. His voice went rough. I've been alone a long time, Lydia, by choice mostly. Seemed easier than risking getting hurt again. But these past couple months, having you here, teaching you things, watching you grow stronger, it's reminded me what it feels like to be part of something bigger than just surviving day to day. So don't you dare feel guilty about that. Even if we lose tomorrow? Even then, because we'll have fought the right fight, and that counts for something. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on, let's both try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day, and we need to be sharp. Lydia took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. At the cabin door, she turned back to him. Jonah, thank you for choosing me, for fighting for me. In the moonlight, his weathered face softened into something that looked almost like peace. Thank you for being worth fighting for. She went inside, climbed into bed, and this time sleep came easier. Because whatever tomorrow brought, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't facing it alone. Morning came too fast and too slow all at once. Lydia woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, her stomach twisted in knots too tight for hunger. Through the window, she could see Jonah moving between the barn and the cabin, his movements deliberate and controlled, but she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the set of his jaw. She dressed carefully in the blue calico dress Emma's mother had given her the week before, combed her hair until it lay smooth, and tied it back with the ribbon that still smelled faintly of her mother's lavender. In the small mirror above the wash basin, she barely recognized herself. 3 months ago, she'd been a hollow-eyed waif on a train platform. Now her cheeks had color, her eyes were clear, and she stood straighter. Ranch life had strengthened her in ways that went beyond the physical. "You look fine," Jonah said when she emerged. He'd shaved and put on clean clothes. Not fancy, but respectable. His shirt was pressed, his boots polished. He looked like a man who understood the importance of appearance, even if he didn't care much for pretense. "Eat something, even if you don't feel like it. Long day ahead." She managed half a biscuit and some coffee. Jonah ate mechanically, his gaze distant. The wagon was already hitched, and Mr. Morse had arranged to meet them at the courthouse at 9 o'clock sharp. The ride into town was quiet. Jonah kept the horses at a steady pace, not rushing, not dawdling. Lydia watched the familiar landscape roll past, the cottonwoods marking Willow Creek, the fence line Jonah had taught her to mend, the rocky outcrop where they'd seen a family of foxes one evening. Each landmark felt precious now.
This
as though
story
she
was
were
posted on the
memorizing it
channel
against
The Rusty
possibility of
Saddle.
loss.
Please do not repost it
"Whatever
in any
happens
form.
today," Jonah said suddenly, his eyes still on the road, "I want you to know something. You've got nothing to prove in there. You just tell the truth, same as you always do. Don't try to make it sound better or worse than it is. The truth's been good enough for us so far. It'll be good enough now. What if the truth isn't enough for the judge? Then the judge is a fool, and we'll deal with it." He glanced at her briefly. "But I don't think he is. Malcolm Hendricks has a reputation for being fair, even if he's a bit stern. He'll listen. That's all we can ask." Redemption Creek's courthouse was a 2-story brick building at the center of town, more substantial than most of the other structures. A small crowd had already gathered on the steps, some curious onlookers, some clear supporters of either side. Lydia saw Emma waving from beside her father, saw Mrs. Hartwell standing with a cluster of severe-looking women, saw Sheriff Thorne leaning against a post with his arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on his face. Mr. Morse met them at the wagon, his leather satchel tucked under one arm. He was younger than Lydia had expected for a lawyer, maybe 40, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Good. You're on time. The judge appreciates punctuality." He nodded to Lydia. "How are you feeling? Nervous? Good. Means you're taking this seriously." He turned to Jonah. "Tom Whitmore is already inside, so are the Chens, the blacksmith, Roberts, sent word he'll testify if needed. We've got a solid group of character witnesses." "And the opposition?" "Mrs. Hartwell will testify, as expected. Caleb will make his case. There may be a few others." Mr. Morse's expression was grim. "The judge will also want to hear from Lydia directly. I've prepared her as best I can, but Caleb's going to try to rattle her, make her seem uncertain or coached. She's tougher than she looks. I'm counting on it." Mr. Morse checked his pocket watch. "We should go in. Court convenes in 10 minutes. The courtroom was smaller than Lydia had imagined, with wooden benches for spectators, a raised platform for the judge, and a witness chair that looked uncomfortably exposed. People filed in and took their seats, the room filling with the sound of shuffling feet and whispered conversations. Lydia sat between Jonah and Mr. Morse at a table facing the judge's bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sheriff Thorne sat at the opposing table, looking confident and relaxed. He caught Jonah's eye and gave a small, mocking salute. Jonah's expression didn't change, but Lydia felt him go very still beside her. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Malcolm Hendricks." The judge entered through a side door, his black robe swishing. He was a tall man, maybe 60, with iron gray hair and a face carved from granite. He settled into his chair with the weight of long authority and surveyed the room with penetrating blue eyes. "Be seated." His voice was deep and carried easily. "We're here today to address concerns raised by Sheriff Caleb Thorne regarding the placement and welfare of Miss Lydia Hale, currently under the guardianship of Mr. Jonah Ryder. Sheriff Thorne, you brought this petition. State your case." Caleb stood, buttoning his vest with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, thank you for hearing this matter. I come before you today not out of personal animosity, but out of genuine concern for the welfare of a vulnerable child." He gestured toward Lydia. 3 months ago, Miss Hale was placed with Mr. Ryder through the orphan train system. While the paperwork may be technically in order, the situation itself raises serious questions of propriety and safety. "What questions specifically?" Judge Hendricks asked. "Mr. Ryder is an unmarried man with no experience raising children, living alone on an isolated ranch. The The arrangement places a 12-year-old girl in a vulnerable position with no female supervision or guidance. Furthermore, Mr. Ryder has a history of violence and antisocial behavior that calls into question his suitability as a guardian. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Mr. Morse scribbled notes. These are serious allegations, Sheriff. Do you have evidence to support them? I have testimony from concerned citizens who have observed the situation, Your Honor. I also have documented evidence of Mr. Ryder's past violent incidents, including an assault charge from 15 years ago. A bar fight when I was 17, Jonah muttered to Mr. Morse. Charges were dropped. Judge Hendricks leaned forward. Sheriff, drop charges are not convictions. Do you have evidence of recent violent behavior or any actual harm to the child? Caleb hesitated. No specific incidents of harm, Your Honor, but the potential for impropriety. Potential is not evidence. I'll hear from your witnesses, but I warn you now, Sheriff, I'm interested in facts, not speculation. Call your first witness. Mrs. Hartwell took the stand, her spine rigid with righteousness. She testified about her visit to the ranch, about the highly irregular living arrangements, about Lydia wearing trousers and performing manual labor unsuitable for a young lady. And did you observe any signs of physical abuse or neglect? Mr. Morse asked during cross-examination. Well, no, but did Miss Hale appear malnourished or poorly clothed? No, however. Did she express any desire to leave Mr. Ryder's care? Mrs. Hartwell's mouth thinned. She was defensive of him, which could indicate a simple yes or no, please. No, she did not. Thank you. No further questions. Two more of Mrs. Hartwell's associates testified, offering similar observations, impropriety, irregularity, concern about appearances, but no actual evidence of wrongdoing. Judge Hendricks listened with increasing impatience, his expression growing more skeptical with each repetition of vague concerns. Finally, Caleb himself took the stand. He painted a picture of Jonah as a loner with anger issues, a man who'd never shown interest in family or community, whose sudden acquisition of a young girl raised obvious red flags. Sheriff Thorne, Mr. Morse said when it was his turn, you mentioned Mr. Ryder's alleged antisocial behavior. Isn't it true that he's helped numerous neighbors with barn raisings, fence repairs, and other community projects over the years? I suppose he's done some of that. And isn't it true that your personal relationship with Mr. Ryder has been antagonistic since you were both young men? Caleb's face reddened. That has nothing to do with... Isn't it true that 15 years ago, you and Mr. Ryder had a physical altercation and that you've held a grudge ever since? I wouldn't call it a grudge. What would you call it, Sheriff? Professional concern? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks an awful lot like a personal vendetta dressed up as civic duty. Objection! Caleb half rose from his chair. Your Honor, this is... Actually, Sheriff, you're a witness, not an attorney. You don't get to object. Judge Hendricks looked thoughtful. But I'll allow the question. Do you have a personal history with Mr. Ryder that might color your judgment in this matter? Caleb's jaw worked. We've had our differences. I see. Thank you, Sheriff. You may step down. The judge turned to Mr. Morse. Call your witnesses. Tom Whitmore testified first, his testimony straightforward and compelling. He spoke of Jonah's character, his work ethic, his reputation among neighboring ranchers. He described seeing Lydia at the church social, healthy and content, making friends. In your observation, Mr. Whitmore, is Miss Hale better or worse off than she was on that orphan train platform? Better, without question. That girl was hollow-eyed and defeated looking when she arrived. Now she's got color in her cheeks and confidence in her bearing. Whatever Jonah Ryder's doing, it's working. The Chens testified next, their accented English earnest and clear. They spoke of Jonah's kindness in helping Mr. Chen repair his laundry equipment, of seeing Lydia in town looking well cared for and appropriately dressed. Mr. Ryder never asked for payment, Mrs. Chen said. He helped because help is needed. That is character of good man. The blacksmith, Roberts, testified to Jonah's skill with horses and his willingness to share knowledge. I said something I shouldn't have a few weeks back, he admitted. Listened to gossip instead of judging for myself. But I've known Jonah Ryder for near 10 years, and I've never seen him be anything but straight dealing and honest. If he says he's giving that girl a fair chance, then that's exactly what he's doing. Finally, Mr. Morse called Jonah to the stand. Lydia watched him walk to the witness chair, his movements calm despite the tension she knew he was carrying. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "Mr. Ryder," Mr. Morse began, "why did
This
you take
story was
responsibility
posted on the
for Lydia
channel The
Hale?"
Rusty Saddle. Please
Jonah
do
was
not
quiet for a
repost it in
moment,
any form.
gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "I saw a child who'd been passed over, who was sitting at the back of that platform like she'd already given up. Reminded me of myself at a certain age, unwanted, overlooked, figuring that's just how life was going to be. I thought if I could give her a different outcome, that was worth doing. Did you consider the fact that you're a single man with no experience raising children?" "I did. Still seemed better than leaving her on that train to be passed over at the next town, and the next, until she either got stuck in some family that wanted free labor or ended up back in an institution." Jonah met the judge's eyes directly. "I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not claiming to be a substitute parent, but I can offer her safety, stability, and skills she'll need to make her own way in the world. That's more than she had 3 months ago." "Describe a typical day at your ranch." "We wake early. I tend the animals while Lydia starts breakfast. We eat together, then work through the day's tasks. I'm teaching her ranch work, fence mending, animal care, basic veterinary skills. She's also learning to ride, to read weather, to understand the land. Evenings, we have supper, she does her studies, reading, arithmetic, writing. Sometimes she reads aloud while I work on equipment repairs. We talk about her day, about things she's learning, about whatever's on her mind." "Do you ever have physical contact with Miss Hale?" The question hung in the air. Jonah's expression didn't change. "I've helped her onto a horse when the stirrup was too high. I've steadied her when she nearly fell off a fence post. Once she came running from the chicken coop after a snake spooked her, and I put a hand on her shoulder to calm her down. That's the extent of it. I don't believe in unnecessary touching, especially with a child who's had enough disruption in her life." "Where does Miss Hale sleep?" "In the cabin, in the only bed. I sleep in the barn loft where I built a bunk years ago. The cabin is hers. I only go in there for meals or if there's weather that makes the barn unsafe." Mr. Morse nodded. "Why that arrangement?" "Because she's a child and deserves privacy and security, because appearances matter even when there's nothing improper happening, and because I'm comfortable in the barn. It's a good arrangement for both of us." Caleb stood to cross-examine, his expression predatory. "Mr. Ryder, you claim to have Miss Hale's best interests at heart. But isn't it true you have no intention of ever marrying and providing her with a proper family structure?" "I have no current plans to marry, no. But Lydia doesn't need me to acquire a wife to have a proper home. She needs consistency, respect, and someone who keeps their word. I can provide all of that. A young girl needs female influence, guidance in becoming a proper lady. A young girl needs to learn how to think, how to work, how to stand on her own 2 feet," Jonah interrupted, his voice hardening. "She can learn needlework and social graces from Emma Whitmore's mother, who's offered to help. But I'm teaching her things that'll serve her no matter where life takes her. How to fix what's broken, how to spot a problem before it becomes a crisis, how to value herself enough to not settle for less than she deserves. That's worth more than knowing which fork to use at a fancy dinner. You don't think propriety matters? I think survival matters more. I think self-sufficiency matters more. I think being able to look yourself in the mirror and know you're useful, capable, and valued matters more than what some busybody thinks about your sleeping arrangements." Jonah leaned forward slightly. "And I think a man who uses his badge to pursue a personal vendetta under the guise of protecting children should probably examine his own priorities before questioning mine." Judge Hendricks rapped his gavel. "Mr. Ryder, keep your answers focused on the questions asked. Sheriff Thorne, do you have further questions that pertain to Miss Hale's welfare rather than Mr. Ryder's personal philosophy?" Caleb's face was mottled with anger. "No, Your Honor." "Then step down, Mr. Ryder." The judge made a note, then looked up. "I'd like to hear from Miss Hale herself. Young lady, please take the stand." Lydia's legs felt unsteady as she walked to the witness chair. The room seemed very large suddenly, full of watching eyes and waiting judgment. She placed her hand on the Bible, her palm damp with nervous sweat, and promised to tell the truth. Judge Hendricks studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than it had been for the other witnesses. Miss Hale, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about your life with Mr. Ryder. Answer honestly. No one here will punish you for the truth. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. Let's start simply. Are you happy living at Mr. Ryder's ranch? Lydia took a breath. Yes, sir. Very happy. Tell me why. Because for the first time since my mother died, I feel like I matter. Not because I'm useful, though I try to be, but because someone chose me when nobody else would. Jonah, Mr. Ryder, he sees me. He listens when I talk. He teaches me things and trusts me to learn them. He treats me like I'm worth the trouble of investing time in. Her voice steadied as she spoke. I know people think it's strange, a single man taking in a girl, but he's never been anything but respectful and kind. He gave me his own bed and sleeps in the barn. He makes sure I have enough to eat, clothes that fit, time to study and learn. He doesn't expect me to be grateful every second or to pretend to be something I'm not. He just lets me be myself while showing me how to be better. Has he ever struck you or threatened you? Never, not once. Has he ever touched you inappropriately or made you uncomfortable in any way? No, sir. The most he's done is help me onto a horse or catch my arm when I was about to fall. He's always proper. Judge Hendricks nodded slowly. If I were to rule that you should be placed with a different family, how would you feel about that? The question hit like a fist to the stomach. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes but forced them back. She needed to be clear, not emotional. I would feel like I was being punished for finally finding somewhere I belong. I would feel like the law was protecting me from someone who's never hurt me while ignoring all the times nobody protected me before. She met the judge's eyes directly. I was on that orphan train for 3 towns, Your Honor. 3 platforms where families walked past me like I was invisible. I know what it feels like to be unwanted, and I know what it feels like to finally be chosen. If you take me away from Jonah, you're not protecting me. You're just teaching me that even when good things happen, they don't last. The courtroom had gone very quiet. Judge Hendricks's stern expression had softened into something that might have been understanding or possibly sadness. Sheriff Thorne, do you wish to question the witness? Caleb stood, and Lydia braced herself. His expression was calculating as he approached. Miss Hale, you seem very loyal to Mr. Ryder. I am. Isn't it possible that loyalty is making you overlook things that might be concerning? That you're so grateful to have a home, you're not being objective about the situation? Lydia considered the question. I don't think being grateful makes me blind, sir. I think it makes me pay attention to what I have, so I don't take it for granted. And what I have is better than what most orphans get. Maybe not what rich people would consider proper, but proper doesn't always mean good. I'd rather have honest and kind than proper and cruel. Has anyone been cruel to you at Mr. Ryder's ranch? No, but plenty of people have been cruel since I got there. People whispering about me in town. People making assumptions about Jonah without ever asking him a single question. People deciding I need rescuing when I'm not in danger. She kept her voice level. The only person who's been consistently kind is the one you're trying to take me away from. Caleb's jaw tightened. Aren't you concerned about growing up without female influence? About learning proper womanly skills? Mrs. Whitmore is teaching me needlework and social graces. I'm learning cooking and household management from practical experience. But I'm also learning things most girls never get to learn. How to doctor a sick calf. How to mend a fence so it holds through winter. How to read a contract so nobody cheats me. How to handle a horse twice my size. Those skills will serve me my whole life, whether I end up married or on my own. Lydia tilted her head slightly. Can you tell me, Sheriff, why knowing how to survive is less important for a girl than knowing how to pour tea? Someone in the gallery suppressed a laugh. Judge Hendrick's mouth twitched. Caleb looked like he'd bitten into something sour. No further questions, he muttered and returned to his seat. Mr. Moore stood. Your Honor, the defense rests. We believe the evidence clearly shows that Miss Hale is thriving under Mr. Ryder's guardianship, that the arrangement is proper and beneficial, and that the concerns raised are based on prejudice and personal animosity rather than genuine welfare issues. Judge Hendricks nodded. I'll take a brief recess to consider the testimony. Court will reconvene in 30 minutes. The next half hour crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lydia sat between Jonah and Mr. Morse on a bench outside the courtroom, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Jonah didn't say anything, but his presence was solid and steady beside her. Emma appeared with her father, offering a canteen
This
of
story
water
was
and an
posted on the
encouraging
channel The
smile.
Rusty Saddle. Please
You
do
did
not
great in
repost
there,
it
she
in any
whispered.
form.
That bit about pouring tea versus survival skills? Perfect. Tom Whitmore clapped Jonah on the shoulder. Whatever happens, you fought the good fight. Finally, the bailiff called them back inside. Judge Hendricks returned to his bench, a single sheet of paper in front of him. His expression was grave as he surveyed the courtroom. I've considered the testimony and evidence presented today. This is not a simple case, despite Sheriff Thorne's desire to make it so. He paused, his gaze moving between Jonah and Lydia. The question before me is not whether Mr. Ryder's arrangement is conventional. It clearly is not. The question is whether it serves the best interests of the child, and whether there is any evidence of harm or impropriety. Lydia held her breath. I find no such evidence. What I see instead is a man who has provided stable housing, adequate food, appropriate supervision, and educational opportunities to a child who is facing an uncertain future. I see a child who is healthy, articulate, and clearly thriving in her current situation. I see neighbors willing to speak to Mr. Ryder's character, and I see a child who speaks with her own voice about her own welfare. Hope flickered in Lydia's chest. I also see a sheriff who appears to be motivated more by personal grievance than by genuine concern, and a group of citizens whose objections are based on propriety rather than protection. While propriety has its place, it cannot be allowed to trump a child's actual well-being. Judge Hendricks picked up his gavel. Therefore, I rule that Lydia Hale shall remain in the guardianship of Jonah Ryder. The arrangement will be reviewed in 6 months to ensure continued appropriate care, but absent any evidence of actual harm or neglect, the guardianship stands. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Relief flooded through Lydia so powerfully, her vision went gray at the edges. Beside her, Jonah let out a breath he might have been holding for hours. However, the judge continued, his voice stern, I have some conditions. Mr. Ryder, you will ensure that Miss Hale has regular contact with appropriate female mentors. You will maintain transparent communication with community members to allay concerns, and you will document her educational progress for review at the 6-month mark. Are these conditions acceptable? Jonah stood. Yes, Your Honor, completely acceptable. Good. Sheriff Thorne, I suggest you redirect your energy toward actual law enforcement rather than pursuing personal vendettas. This matter is closed unless new evidence of actual wrongdoing comes to light. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell again, and suddenly the courtroom erupted in sound. Tom Whitmore was shaking Jonah's hand. Emma was hugging Lydia. The Chens were beaming and bowing. Mrs. Hartwell swept out with her associates, her face tight with disapproval. Caleb Thorne stood frozen at his table, his expression dark with fury. Mr. Morse gathered his papers with a satisfied smile. Congratulations. That went better than I dared hope. Thank you, Jonah said, shaking the lawyer's hand. Send me your bill. Already did. It's been paid. Jonah frowned. I didn't... Community collection, Tom Whitmore interjected. Folks pass the hat. We take care of our own. Lydia saw something shift in Jonah's face, a softening, a kind of wonder, as though he was finally understanding that he wasn't as alone as he'd always believed himself to be. Outside, the late morning sun was brilliant and warm. Lydia stood on the courthouse steps and felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. They'd won. She was staying. The future she'd barely let herself hope for was real and solid, and hers. Jonah appeared beside her, his hat in his hands. Ready to go home? Home. The words settled into her chest like a truth she could finally believe. Yes, she said. Let's go home. They didn't speak much on the ride back to the ranch. The silence between them was different now, lighter, no longer weighted with the dread of what might come. Lydia watched the familiar landscape unfold, the cottonwoods along Willow Creek catching the afternoon breeze, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This place was hers now, officially and legally, and no amount of whispered disapproval could take it away. Jonah kept the horses at an easy pace, his weathered hands loose on the reins. When they crested the rise and the cabin came into view, he pulled the wagon to a stop for a moment. "Look at that," he said quietly. Lydia followed his gaze. The small cabin with its sagging porch, the barn that needed a coat of paint, the corral with its weathered fence posts. It wasn't much by anyone's standards. But the afternoon sun painted it all in shades of gold, and smoke from a neighbor's distant chimney rose straight into the clear sky, and the whole scene felt like peace made visible. "Home," Lydia said softly. "Yeah." Jonah clicked his tongue and the horses moved forward again. "That it is." They spent the rest of the day catching up on chores neglected during the trial preparation. Jonah checked on the cattle while Lydia tended the chickens and started supper. The routine felt like medicine after weeks of disruption, each familiar task a reminder that life could return to normal now. That evening, as they sat down to fried potatoes and salt pork, Jonah cleared his throat in a way that signaled he had something to say. "Judge gave us conditions to meet," he began, cutting into his food. "Said you need regular contact with female mentors. Mrs. Whitmore already offered to help with needlework and such, but I'm thinking we should make it more official. Maybe you could spend Saturday afternoons with Emma and her mother. Learn whatever it is women think other women need to know." Lydia smiled. "I'd like that. Emma's good company." "She is. Smart girl. Speaks her mind." He paused. "Judge also said we need to document your educational progress. I've been teaching you what I know. Arithmetic for ranch accounts, reading, basic science through animal care. But maybe we should get you some proper school books. Make sure you're learning what you'd learn in a regular classroom." "The schoolhouse in town has classes." Jonah's expression went carefully neutral. "You want to attend?" Lydia considered it. The thought of sitting in a classroom full of children who'd heard all the gossip about her and Jonah made her stomach clench. But she also knew the value of education, knew that learning from books and qualified teachers would open doors that ranch skills alone couldn't. "Maybe," she said slowly. "But not yet. Let the talk die down first. Let people see that the judge made the right decision. Then, when school starts up again in the fall, we can think about it." "That's fair reasoning." Jonah looked relieved. "Truth is, I'd miss having you around during the day. Gotten used to the company. But if you want proper schooling, we'll make it happen. For now, I'd rather learn from you, and maybe we could get some advanced books from town. Emma said her mother has a whole shelf of literature I could borrow." "Then that's what we'll do." Jonah stood to clear the plates. "One step at a time. We don't need to prove anything to anyone except that judge in 6 months." But proving it to the judge turned out to be the easy part. Proving it to the town was another matter entirely. The first indication came 3 days later when Jonah went to town for supplies. Lydia stayed behind to finish mending a section of fence, so she didn't witness what happened. But when Jonah returned, his face was set in hard lines and his knuckles were scraped raw. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying out to meet the wagon. "Nothing worth discussing." He climbed down stiffly, favoring his left side. "Jonah," he sighed, recognizing that tone. "Ran into Caleb at the general store. He said some things. I said some things back. He took a swing. I blocked it. His hand met the wall instead of my face. Store owner kicked us both out. He started unloading supplies with jerky, angry movements. Man can't even buy flour without drama." Lydia grabbed a sack and followed him toward the cabin. "What did he say?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Jonah set down the supplies and turned to face her. He said the judge made a mistake. Said I'd slip up eventually and prove him right. Said some other things about my character and my motives that aren't worth repeating. His voice was tight. I should have walked away, should have let it roll off. But I'm tired of that man questioning my integrity. "You didn't hit him, though." "No. Came close, but no." Jonah rubbed his scraped knuckles. "Getting arrested for assault wouldn't exactly help our case for the 6-month review." Over the following weeks, the tension in town became more apparent. Some people went out of their way to be supportive. Tom Whitmore, the Chens, even the store clerk who'd witnessed Jonah and Caleb's confrontation testified that the sheriff had thrown the first punch. but others made their disapproval clear through cold shoulders and pointed silence. Mrs. Hartwell's circle refused to acknowledge Lydia when she attended church. The blacksmith who testified on their behalf faced criticism from customers who threatened to take their business elsewhere. The community was fracturing, and Lydia and Jonah sat at the fault line. Emma remained a steadfast friend. True to the arrangement, Lydia began spending Saturday afternoons at the Whitmore Ranch, learning needlework and cooking from Mrs. Whitmore, while Emma provided
This story
running
was
commentary
posted on the
everything
channel The
from
Rusty
proper
Saddle.
embroidery stitches
Please do not
to the
repost
latest
it
town
in any
gossip.
form.
Mrs. Patterson told Mrs. Hartwell that you're being raised like a savage, Emma reported one afternoon while they worked on samplers. Mrs. Hartwell agreed and said it was a disgrace. Then Mrs. Patterson's husband reminded her that you beat her son at arithmetic during the church picnic quiz, and Mrs. Patterson got very quiet. Mrs. Whitmore, a patient woman with laugh lines around her eyes, shook her head. Emma, dear, perhaps we should focus on the stitching rather than the gossip. But Ma, it's important for Lydia to know who's saying what. It's important for Lydia to learn that other people's opinions hold exactly as much weight as she gives them. Mrs. Whitmore smiled at Lydia. You're doing fine, sweetheart. Let the gossips tire themselves out. But the gossip didn't tire. It evolved. Without the spectacle of a trial to fuel it, the talk shifted from Jonah's suitability as a guardian to speculation about what would happen when Lydia got older, when she became a young woman living alone with an unmarried man, when the situation became even more improper. Lydia tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed her like shadows. At the Saturday market, women pulled their daughters away as though impropriety were contagious. At church, she sat alone in the back pew because no one would share a bench with her. Even kind gestures felt loaded with pity or judgment. One evening, she came home from the Whitmores fighting tears. Jonah took one look at her face and put down the harness he'd been mending. What happened? Nothing. Everything. She sank onto the porch steps. I'm tired of being stared at, tired of people whispering, tired of feeling like I have to prove I'm not doing anything wrong when I'm not doing anything wrong. Jonah sat beside her, his shoulder a warm, solid presence. I know, it's wearing. Does it ever get better, or is this just how it's going to be? Honestly, I don't know. Some people will never be satisfied no matter what we do. But some people will come around once they see we're not going anywhere, that we're just living our lives quietly and not bothering anyone. He picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the corral. The question is whether you can live with being the subject of gossip. Because if you can't, if it's making you miserable, then we need to talk about other options. Lydia's head snapped up. You mean sending me away? No, I mean, maybe we need to give the gossips something else to think about. He was quiet for a moment. The judge said I needed to maintain transparent communication with the community. Maybe that means being more visible, not less. Participating in town events. Letting people see our daily life instead of letting their imaginations run wild. You hate town events. I do. But I hate watching you hurt more. He looked at her seriously. We could start attending the church socials regularly. You could participate in the quilting circle Mrs. Chen keeps inviting you to. I could help with the barn raising the Johnsons have planned for next month. Make ourselves so present and so normal that people get bored talking about us. It was a strategy born of exhaustion and determination, but Lydia could see the logic in it. Hiding fed speculation. Visibility might starve it. All right, she said. Let's try it. So they did. Over the next month, Jonah and Lydia became fixtures at community events. Jonah helped raise the Johnsons' barn, working alongside men who'd previously kept their distance. Lydia joined the quilting circle, enduring Mrs. Hartwell's cold disapproval while learning intricate stitching patterns from Mrs. Chen and the other women. They attended every church service, sat together in the middle pews instead of hiding in the back, and made conversation with anyone willing to talk. It was exhausting. Every interaction felt like a performance, every smile forced, every polite response calculated to present the right image. But slowly, incrementally, something began to shift. People who'd been coldly polite became genuinely friendly. Women who'd avoided Lydia started asking her opinion on quilt patterns or sharing recipes. Men who'd treated Jonah with suspicion began inviting him to help with various projects, valuing his skill and steady work. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a Saturday market in late September. Lydia was helping Mrs. Chen sell hand-embroidered handkerchiefs when a young mother approached, a fussy toddler on her hip and desperation in her eyes. "Excuse me, but I heard you know about animal doctoring?" The woman looked embarrassed to be asking. "My son, he grabbed a cat wrong and got scratched something fierce. It's all swollen and hot. The doctor's gone to the next county and won't be back till Tuesday. I don't know what to do." Lydia glanced at Mrs. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "Let me see." The boy's hand was indeed badly infected, red streaks radiating from deep scratches. Lydia recognized the signs immediately from treating similar injuries on the ranch. "You need to soak it in warm salt water 3 times a day," she said, her voice calm and confident. "Clean the wound thoroughly each time. Make a poultice from honey and crushed yarrow leaves if you can find any, or just honey if you can't. Keep it wrapped clean. If the red streaks spread past his wrist or he develops a fever, you'll need to get him to a doctor in the next town over. But if you keep it clean and watch it close, it should heal up fine." The woman's face flooded with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Word spread. Within a week, 2 more people had approached Lydia for advice on minor medical issues. One about a persistent cough in a child, another about a wound that wouldn't stop weeping. She helped where she could, always careful to say she wasn't a real doctor, just someone who'd learned practical care from ranch work. But her confidence and knowledge impressed people, and suddenly, she wasn't just the peculiar orphan girl living with Jonah Ryder. She was useful. She was valuable. The shift in perception was subtle but real. Invitations started coming, to quilting bees, to harvest celebrations, to informal gatherings where women shared work and conversation. Lydia was still an outsider in many ways, but she was becoming a known outsider, someone with a place in the community's fabric. Jonah noticed the change too. Men who'd barely acknowledged him now stopped to discuss cattle prices, weather patterns, the best way to treat hoof rot. He was invited to join a poker game, to contribute his opinion on town infrastructure improvements, to participate in decisions that affected the whole community. "We're becoming respectable," he observed one evening with wry amusement. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Is that a bad thing?" "No, just strange." He cleaned his coffee cup thoughtfully. "Spent most of my life keeping people at arm's length. Seemed safer that way. Now here we are, integrated into community life whether we like it or not." "Do you like it?" He considered the question seriously. "Parts of it. I like knowing there are people who'd help if we needed it. I like seeing you make friends, have opportunities I couldn't give you on my own. But I won't lie. I also miss the quiet. Miss being able to ignore what people thought because they didn't think about me at all. We could go back to being invisible. Stay on the ranch. Avoid town." "No." Jonah's voice was firm. "We fought too hard to earn our place here. We're not running from it now. Besides, the judge expects to see you thriving in 6 months. Hard to prove that if we're hiding out here like hermits." The 6-month review loomed larger as autumn deepened into early winter. Mr. Morse sent regular correspondence, checking in on their progress and reminding them to document everything: Lydia's educational advancement, her social integration, any issues that arose. Jonah kept meticulous records, noting books read, skills learned, community activities attended. He even asked Mrs. Whitmore to write a letter attesting to Lydia's progress in domestic arts. "You're being thorough," Mr. Morse wrote in one letter. "But don't let documentation consume your life. The point is to show she's thriving, not to prove you're perfect. No one's perfect." Still, Jonah worried. Lydia could see it in the way he double-checked everything, in the extra care he took with the account books, in the questions he asked about her lessons with Mrs. Whitmore. The trial had shaken his confidence in ways he didn't fully acknowledge, made him second-guess decisions that once would have come easily. The worry came to a head on a cold November afternoon when Lydia found him in the barn, staring at the documentation he'd compiled. "It's not enough," he muttered, more to himself than to her. 3 months of records. How do we prove in 3 months that this is working when people spent years convinced it couldn't? Jonah. Lydia climbed up to the loft where he sat surrounded by papers. "You're spiraling." "I'm being realistic." "You're being scared. There's a difference." She sat beside him, looking at the neat columns of his handwriting, documenting every book she'd read, every skill acquired, every social event attended. This is more than enough. Look at all of this. 3 months ago, could you have written down even half of what I've learned? That's not the point. The point is you're worried the judge will find some reason to change his mind, that Caleb will dig up new evidence or find a loophole. Lydia took the paper from his hands. But worrying won't prevent that. All we can do is keep living our lives the best way we know how.
This story
And
was
trust that the
posted
truth
on the
is
channel
obvious
The
enough
Rusty
that even a
Saddle.
judge can
Please
see
do
it.
not repost
Jonah
it in any
exhaled
form.
slowly. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, she smiled. Someone who taught me that you can't control what other people think or do. You can only control yourself and your response to them. Remember telling me that? Vaguely. Well, I remember it clearly, because it was the first time someone treated me like I had enough sense to understand complicated ideas. She handed back the documentation. This is good work. It shows you care, but you don't need to prove we're perfect. You just need to show we're doing all right, and we are. He studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering in his eyes. Yeah, I suppose we are. The weeks leading up to the review passed with increasing speed. Winter settled in properly, bringing snow and shorter days, and the kind of cold that made breath visible and fingers stiff. Lydia learned to break ice on the water troughs, to bundle herself in layers of wool and leather, to appreciate the warmth of the cabin after a day working in brutal wind. She also celebrated her 13th birthday, a milestone she'd almost forgotten until Emma showed up with a cake her mother had baked and a package wrapped in brown paper. "Happy birthday!" Emma announced, stomping snow off her boots. "Ma sent cake, and I got you something from the general store." Inside the package was a journal, its leather cover embossed with wildflowers. Lydia ran her fingers over it, overwhelmed. "Emma, this is too much, and it's perfect. You're always thinking deep thoughts and asking complicated questions. Now you can write them down." Emma grinned. "Besides, every girl should have a journal. It's practically required." They ate cake, Jonah pretending to grumble about the sweetness while eating 2 slices, and spent the evening playing cards and telling stories. It was simple, informal, and exactly what Lydia needed. When Emma left and the cabin grew quiet again, Lydia opened the journal to its first blank page. She stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what to write. Finally, she settled on something simple but true. "Today I turned 13. A year ago, I didn't think I'd live to see this birthday. I thought I'd disappear into the system, become one of those kids nobody remembers. But I'm here. I have a home, and people who care about me, and a future that feels possible instead of just predetermined. If someone had told me on that orphan train platform that this is where I'd end up, I wouldn't have believed them. I barely believe it now. But it's real, and I'm grateful." The review date was set for February 10th. As the day approached, the same tension that had preceded the trial returned, though muted now by experience. They knew what to expect. They knew how to prepare, and they knew they'd faced worse and survived. Mr. Morse arrived the day before the review to go over their documentation and prepare their testimony. "This is excellent," he said, reviewing Jonah's records. "Comprehensive without being excessive. Shows steady progress and genuine care. The judge should be satisfied." "Should be isn't the same as will be," Jonah muttered. "Nothing in law is guaranteed, but I'm confident." Mr. Morse turned to Lydia. "You've grown since the last time I saw you. Taller, more assured. That'll help. Judges appreciate seeing tangible evidence of thriving." The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Unlike the trial, this would be a private review in the judge's chambers rather than a public spectacle. Only Jonah, Lydia, Mr. Morse and potentially Sheriff Thorne would attend unless the judge requested additional witnesses. They arrived early, waiting in the courthouse hallway while the judge finished other business. Caleb showed up exactly on time, his expression neutral but his eyes hard. He nodded to Mr. Morse, ignored Jonah completely, and took a seat on the opposite bench. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. Lydia focused on her breathing, on the documentation folder in Mr. Morse's lap, on anything except the sheriff's presence across the hallway. Finally, the door opened and Judge Hendrick's clerk gestured them inside. The judge's chambers were smaller and less formal than the courtroom, lined with law books and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. Judge Hendrick sat behind a massive oak desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a file. Mr. Ryder, Miss Hale, Sheriff Thorne, please be seated. He closed the file and removed his glasses. This is a standard 6-month review as ordered by the court. I'll hear brief updates from each party, review the documentation provided, and make a determination about whether the guardianship should continue unchanged, be modified, or be terminated. Mr. Morse, let's start with you. Mr. Morse presented their case efficiently, walking through Lydia's educational progress, her social integration, the community support they'd built. He submitted Jonah's documentation, letters from Mrs. Whitmore and Mrs. Chen, even a note from Tom Whitmore attesting to Lydia's maturity and capability. Judge Hendricks reviewed each item carefully, occasionally making notes. When Mr. Morse finished, the judge turned to Caleb. Sheriff Thorne, do you have any new concerns to raise? Caleb shifted in his seat. No new concerns, Your Honor, but I maintain that the situation remains irregular and potentially problematic as Miss Hale ages. Problematic how, specifically? Propriety concerns. A teenage girl living with an unmarried man. The same concerns you raised 6 months ago, which I determined were insufficient grounds for removal. Judge Hendrick's voice was dry. Do you have actual evidence of impropriety, Sheriff, or are you simply reiterating speculation? I'm expressing legitimate concern about concern noted. Anything else? Caleb's jaw tightened. No, Your Honor. Good. The judge turned to Lydia. Miss Hale, how would you characterize these past 6 months? Lydia straightened in her chair. They've been good, Your Honor. I've learned a lot, both practical skills from Jonah and social skills from Mrs. Whitmore and others in town. I've made friends. I've started to feel like I belong somewhere instead of just existing as a burden. Has Mr. Ryder's behavior toward you remained appropriate? Always? Has there been any circumstance that made you uncomfortable or unsafe? No, sir. The only times I've felt uncomfortable have been when people in town made assumptions about our situation without actually knowing anything about it. But that's gotten better as people have gotten to know us. Judge Hendricks nodded slowly. Mr. Ryder, anything you'd like to add? Jonah cleared his throat. Only that I'm committed to continuing what we've started. Lydia's got potential that shouldn't be wasted. She's smart, capable, and deserves every opportunity to build a good life. I'll keep providing that as long as the court allows it and as long as she wants to stay. The judge made a final note, then sat back in his chair. I've reviewed your documentation, heard your testimonies, and considered Sheriff Thorne's concerns. Based on the evidence before me, I see no reason to alter my previous ruling. Miss Hale is clearly thriving. Mr. Ryder has met and exceeded the conditions I imposed, and the concerns raised remain speculative rather than substantive. Relief washed through Lydia so powerfully, her hands trembled. Therefore, the guardianship continues unchanged. We'll schedule another review in 12 months to assess ongoing progress. Until then, carry on as you have been. Judge Hendricks looked directly at Caleb. Sheriff, unless you have new and compelling evidence of actual wrongdoing, I don't expect to see this case back in my chambers. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor, Caleb said tightly. Excellent. You're all dismissed. They filed out of the chambers into the bright winter afternoon. Lydia felt like she was floating. The weight of uncertainty lifted once again. Jonah shook Mr. Morse's hand, thanking him for his continued representation. The lawyer smiled and waved off the gratitude. You're making my job easy by being good clients. Keep doing what you're doing. As they walked toward the wagon, Caleb stepped into their path. For a moment, Lydia thought he might start another confrontation, but instead he just looked at Jonah with something like weary resignation. You won, he said flatly. Again. This wasn't about winning, Jonah replied. It was about doing right by a kid who deserved a fair chance. Keep telling yourself that. Caleb turned to leave, then paused. But Ryder? Don't think this means I'll ever trust you. I'll be watching, and the first time you slip, I'll be there. I don't plan on slipping, Jonah's voice was calm. And I don't need your trust. I've got the law on my side and my own conscience clear. That's enough. Caleb walked away without another word. Lydia watched him go, feeling something close to pity. He'd spent so much energy fighting a battle that was never really about her at all, and he had nothing to show for it but bitterness. On the ride home, Jonah was quiet, but the tension had drained from his shoulders. When they crested the familiar rise and saw the ranch spread out below them, he pulled the wagon to a stop again. 12 months, he said. That's how long until the next review. We'll be ready. I know we will. He looked at her seriously. But Lydia, I want you to understand something. These reviews, the judge's approval, the town's acceptance, none of that determines whether this arrangement is right. You and I, we're the ones who know if this is working. And if at any point you decide it's not, if you want something different, you tell me. Don't stay because a judge said you should or because you're worried about disappointing me. Stay because it's where you want to be. Lydia met his eyes. It's where I want to be. Good. He clicked his tongue and the horses moved forward. Then let's go home and celebrate surviving another round of bureaucracy. I think there's still some of Emma's birthday cake left. That evening, as Lydia wrote in her journal by lamplight, and Jonah read his agricultural journal across the table, she realized something profound. This quiet domesticity,
This story was
simple routine
posted
of
on the
shared
channel
space
The
and
Rusty
comfortable
Saddle.
silence,
Please do not
this was
repost it in
family.
any form.
Not because a judge said so or because paperwork declared it legal, but because they'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other through every challenge that came. She'd been picked last on that platform, but she'd been picked by the right person. And that made all the difference. Spring came late that year, snow lingering in shadowed hollows well into April before finally surrendering to the relentless sun. Lydia watched the transformation from winter's stark beauty to the prairie's explosive green with the appreciation of someone who'd learned to read the land's rhythms. She could predict rain now by the way clouds gathered over the western ridge, could tell when cattle were fixing to calve by their restless pacing, could estimate how much hay they'd need to cut based on the density of early grass growth. She turned 14 in November, and the changes in her went beyond accumulated knowledge. She was taller now, nearly as tall as Mrs. Whitmore, and the hollowness that had haunted her features on the orphan train platform had been replaced by the lean strength of someone who worked hard and ate well. Her hands bore calluses from rope and reins, and her face had taken on the prairie tan that marked people who spent their lives under open sky. Emma noticed the transformation during one of their Saturday sessions. "You don't look like a city girl anymore," she observed, threading her needle with practiced ease. "You look like you belong here." "I feel like I do," Lydia admitted, working on the quilt square Mrs. Whitmore had assigned her. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that 2 years ago, I didn't even know this place existed." 2 years. Emma shook her head. "Feels longer, doesn't it? Like you've always been part of things here." It did feel that way, though Lydia knew the acceptance had been hard-won. The town had finally stopped whispering, or at least had moved on to fresher gossip. She and Jonah were simply fixtures now, unusual perhaps, but familiar enough to no longer warrant constant speculation. The 12-month review came and went with far less drama than the previous 2 hearings. Judge Hendricks reviewed their documentation, noted Lydia's continued progress, and renewed the guardianship without hesitation. Even Caleb seemed to have lost his appetite for the fight, appearing at the hearing only to state he had no new concerns before departing with barely concealed frustration. "I think he's finally given up," Mr. Morse said afterward, or at least realized the judge won't entertain his vendetta anymore. But Jonah remained cautious. Men like Caleb don't give up, they just wait for better opportunities. The opportunity came in late May, though not in any form they could have anticipated. Lydia was working in the garden behind the cabin, coaxing tomato plants and beans into neat rows, when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and saw a rider she didn't recognize coming up the road at a gallop. Jonah emerged from the barn, his hand automatically checking for the rifle he kept nearby. The rider pulled up in a cloud of dust, his horse lathered and breathing hard. "Jonah Ryder?" the man gasped. "That's me? Tom Whitmore sent me. There's been an accident at his place. Barn collapsed. He's trapped under the beams and Emma's there alone trying to get him out. Says he needs every able body that can lift." Jonah was already moving. "Lydia, hitch the wagon. Fast as you can. He gestured to the rider. "Head back and tell Tom we're coming. Stop at the Morrison place on your way and get them moving too." The rider wheeled his horse and took off. Lydia ran for the wagon, her heart pounding. Emma and her father, Tom, who'd testified for them, who'd become one of Jonah's closest friends, who'd shown them kindness when others offered only judgment. They made the 5-mile trip in record time, Jonah pushing the horses harder than was probably wise. When they arrived at the Whitmore Ranch, the scene was chaos. The barn's north wall had collapsed inward, massive beams forming a deadly tangle of wood and debris. Mrs. Whitmore stood at the edge of the wreckage, her face white with terror. Emma was inside the collapse, her voice rising in desperate encouragement. "Pa, stay with me. Help's coming. Just stay awake." Jonah jumped down before the wagon fully stopped. "Emma, can you see him?" "He's pinned under the main beam. His legs. I can't move it alone." Emma's voice cracked. "It's too heavy." "Don't try. Wait for help." Jonah turned to Lydia. "Stay with Mrs. Whitmore. If anyone else arrives, send them in immediately. And get blankets ready in case—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Lydia understood, in case they got Tom out and needed to treat for shock or worse. More neighbors arrived, the Morrisons, the Chens, even old Roberts the blacksmith. Jonah organized them quickly, his voice calm and authoritative despite the urgency. They formed a human chain around the massive beam pinning Tom, coordinating their lift on Jonah's count. "On 3. 1, 2, 3, lift!" The beam rose a few inches. Tom screamed, a sound that made Lydia's stomach clench. But Emma was ready, dragging her father out from under the timber with strength born of pure terror. The moment he was clear, the men lowered the beam carefully and turned their attention to the injured man. Tom's legs were badly crushed, blood soaking through his pants. Mrs. Whitmore rushed to his side, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the damage. Jonah knelt beside them, his expression grim. "We need to get him to a doctor, now. The nearest doctor's in Millerville. That's a 2-hour ride at speed." Mr. Morrison looked sick. "He might not have 2 hours." "Then we make do with what we have." Jonah turned to Lydia. "You've helped me treat cattle with broken bones. This isn't that different. Come here." Lydia's mind went blank with panic. "Jonah, I can't. He's a person, not a cow. And he's dying while we argue. I need your hands because they're steadier than mine right now. Come here." She moved on instinct, kneeling beside Tom. His face was gray with pain and shock, his breathing shallow and rapid. Jonah was already cutting away the bloody fabric of his pants, exposing the mangled flesh beneath. "Left leg's broken in at least 2 places," Jonah muttered. "Right leg's worse. We need to splint them before we move him, or the bones could tear through arteries." He looked at Lydia. "Remember when we splinted that calf's leg last winter? Same principle. We need straight branches, strips of cloth, and someone to hold him still while we work." The next hour existed in a blur of blood and broken bone and Tom's agonized breathing. Lydia followed Jonah's instructions, her hands moving with a steadiness that surprised her, even as her mind screamed that this was insane, that she wasn't qualified, that they should wait for a real doctor. But there was no time to wait, and Jonah's quiet confidence guided her through each step. They splinted both legs, bound the wounds as best they could, and fashioned a makeshift stretcher from barn doors and rope. Getting Tom into the wagon without jarring the brakes was excruciating for everyone involved, but they managed it. Mrs. Whitmore climbed in beside her husband, cradling his head in her lap. "Emma, you ride with us," Jonah said. "Lydia, you drive our wagon back to the ranch, then come to town. Bring my medical kit from the barn and that bottle of whiskey I keep in the cabinet. We're going to need both." The ride to Millerville was the longest 2 hours of Jonah's life, though he'd tell Lydia later that Tom's survival was testament to the man's sheer stubborn will. They got him to the doctor just as shock was setting in deep, his pulse thready and his skin clammy. The doctor, an older man named Brennan, who'd seen his share of frontier injuries, took one look at the splints and nodded approval. "Good work. Probably saved his life. Whoever set these knew what they were doing." "Girl I'm raising helped me," Jonah said. "She's got steady hands and learns fast." "Well, she might have just saved your friend's legs, maybe his life." Dr. Brennan turned to the Whitmores. "I'll do what I can, but I'll be honest, this is bad. He'll need surgery, weeks of recovery, and even then I can't promise he'll walk normally again." Emma, who'd been silent since leaving the ranch, suddenly broke. Great gasping sobs shook her frame as the terror and adrenaline drained away, leaving only the stark reality of how close she'd come to losing her father. Mrs. Whitmore pulled her daughter close, her own tears falling silent and steady. Jonah stepped outside to give them privacy and found half the town gathered in the street. News had spread fast. People clustered in worried groups, asking questions, offering help, sharing the fear that came with frontier life where accidents could turn deadly in heartbeats. Caleb Thorne stood among them, his expression for once stripped of animosity. Tom going to make it? Doctor thinks so, but it's going to be a long recovery. He's a good man, doesn't deserve this. Caleb paused, something working behind his eyes. You did good work out there, Ryder. Getting him stabilized. Not everyone would have kept their head. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest thing to respect Caleb had ever offered. Jonah accepted it with a simple nod. Lydia arrived an hour later with the medical supplies, her face drawn with worry. Jonah met her outside the doctor's office and took the bag from her trembling hands. How is he? Doctor's optimistic he'll survive. Whether he'll walk again is another question. Jonah studied her face. You did good today. Real good. You kept your head when most people would have panicked. I was terrified. I know, but you worked through it. That's what matters. He squeezed her shoulder. That's what courage is, being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. Tom survived the surgery, though the doctor's prognosis was guarded. Both legs were badly broken, the right one requiring pins to hold the shattered bone together. He'd need months of recovery, and even then might walk with a permanent limp. For a rancher whose livelihood depended on physical labor, it was devastating news. The community rallied immediately. Neighbors took turns working the Whitmore ranch, handling the daily tasks Tom could no longer manage. Someone organized a rotation for bringing meals to the family. The church collected funds to help cover medical expenses. Jonah threw himself into helping manage the Whitmore ranch, spending long days there, while Lydia handled their own place with increasing independence. She was capable enough now to manage the basic operations alone, feeding animals, checking fence lines, handling minor emergencies. It was a testament to how far she'd come, though she wouldn't fully appreciate it until later. One evening, 3 weeks after the accident, Emma appeared at their cabin door looking exhausted and older than her 15 years. Pa wants to talk to you, she told Jonah. Both of you, says it's important. They found Tom propped up in bed, his legs still splinted and elevated, his face gaunt from pain and limited mobility, but his eyes were sharp and focused as they entered. Jonah, Lydia, sit down. He gestured to chairs Emma had positioned beside the bed. I need to have a difficult conversation with you both. Jonah's expression grew guarded. What kind of conversation? The kind where I ask for help I've got no right to ask for. Tom shifted carefully, wincing. Doctor says I'm going to be laid up for at least 4 more months. Even after that, I won't be able to do the kind of heavy work ranching requires. Not for a long time, maybe not ever at full capacity. We're already helping. I know, and I'm grateful. But neighbors can't run my ranch indefinitely.
This story was
They've got
posted
their
on
own
the
places
channel
to
The
manage.
Rusty Saddle.
Tom's
Please
jaw
do not
tightened.
repost it in any
I
form.
need someone here full-time, someone who knows ranching, who I can trust, who can make decisions and handle problems without needing to check with me about every little thing. Understanding dawned in Jonah's eyes. Tom, I can't abandon my own ranch. I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking you to merge operations. Bring your cattle here, work both properties as one unit. It's only about 5 miles between us, perfectly manageable. Tom looked between them. I'll sign whatever papers you need. We split profits fairly, make all major decisions together, but I need someone I trust running the day-to-day operations, and there's no one I trust more than you. The proposal hung in the air, heavy with implications. It would mean massive changes to their carefully built life, new responsibilities, new complications. What about your place? Lydia asked quietly. If we're both here, who watches the cabin? That's the other part. Tom glanced at his wife and daughter. Emma's been talking about this, and Sarah and I agree it makes sense. You move into our house, Lydia. We've got the extra bedroom upstairs. You'd have proper female supervision, companionship your own age, and it would solve the propriety concerns that keep following you both around. Lydia felt her chest constrict. Move away from the cabin, leave the home she'd fought so hard to keep? Jonah's expression was carefully neutral. That's a lot to consider. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. But Jonah, I'm looking at losing everything my family built over 3 generations because I was careless checking a barn wall for rot. I need help, not charity, real partnership, and I think this could work for all of us. Give us a few days to think it over, Jonah said finally. Talk it through. Look at the practical details. This isn't a decision to make lightly. They rode home in silence, both lost in thought. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of amber and gold. When they reached the cabin, Jonah unhitched the horses while Lydia started supper. They moved through their evening routine mechanically, each avoiding the conversation they knew they needed to have. Finally, over coffee after the meal, Jonah broke the silence. What do you think? Lydia stared into her cup. I think it makes practical sense. Tom needs help. We'd benefit from the larger operation, and me living with the Whitmores would end a lot of the gossip once and for all. That's the practical answer. What do you feel? Scared, sad, like I'm losing something even though I know I'm not. She looked up, meeting his eyes. This cabin, it's where I finally felt safe, where I learned I could be worth something. The idea of leaving it feels like losing that. You're not losing anything. You'd just be expanding what you have. Jonah turned his cup slowly. But I understand the fear. This place, it's been our fortress. Our proof that we could make something work despite everyone's doubts. Walking away from it feels like admitting defeat. Is that how you feel? He considered the question carefully. Part of me does. Part of me wants to tell Tom to find someone else, to protect what we've built here. But another part sees the opportunity. Tom's right. Combining operations makes sense economically. The Whitmores are good people who've stood by us, and having you live there would shut down the last of the propriety arguments before they could resurface when you get older. So you think we should do it? I think we should decide what's best for you, not just what's easiest for me. Jonah leaned forward. You're 14 now, old enough to have a real say in your future. If living here, maintaining our current arrangement, matters more to you than the practical benefits of Tom's offer, then we tell him no and figure out another way to help. Lydia thought about it seriously, weighing what she'd be gaining against what she'd be losing. A proper bedroom instead of the small cabin. Daily companionship with Emma instead of long stretches of solitude. Female mentorship from Mrs. Whitmore. Social respectability that might open doors currently closed to her. Against that, the loss of the home that had saved her, the daily proximity to Jonah that had become her anchor, the independence she'd grown to value. Can I ask you something honestly? She said finally. Always. If I live with the Whitmores, does that change things between us? Are you still my guardian, or does this become something different? Jonah's expression softened. Lydia, you could live on the moon and I'd still be your guardian. Still be the person who's responsible for you, who cares what happens to you, who wants to see you thrive. Living arrangements don't change that. All they change is who you eat breakfast with and which roof shelters you at night. Promise? I promise. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You're stuck with me until you're 18 and legal to make your own way. Maybe longer if you can tolerate having me around. This partnership with Tom, it's a business arrangement. What you and I have, that's family. Nobody moves that 5 miles down the road. The simple declaration settled something in Lydia's chest. She'd been chosen that day on the platform, and that choice was permanent regardless of where she slept. All right, she said. Let's tell Tom yes. The transition happened gradually over the next month. They moved Jonah's cattle to the Whitmore Ranch first, merging the herds and adjusting to the larger operation. Jonah split his time between both properties initially, but as Tom's recovery progressed and they formalized their partnership, it became clear that the Whitmore Ranch would be the center of operations. Lydia moved into the Whitmore's upstairs bedroom on a bright June morning. Emma helped her unpack, chattering excitedly about finally having someone to share the space with, while Mrs. Whitmore made up the bed with crisp sheets and quilts that smelled of lavender. You'll always have a place here, Mrs. Whitmore said warmly, for as long as you need it. The first few nights were strange. The house felt too big, too full of other people's sounds and rhythms. Lydia lay awake listening to Emma's soft breathing across the room, to Tom's occasional groans of pain from downstairs, to the unfamiliar creaks and settles of a different structure. She missed the cabin's intimate smallness, missed knowing exactly where Jonah was at all times. But gradually, she adapted. Emma was easy to live with, cheerful and undemanding. Mrs. Whitmore's gentle guidance felt like having a mother again, someone who cared about the small details of her life. Tom, even injured and frustrated with his limitations, treated her with affection and respect. She was part of a family in a way she'd never quite been at the cabin, surrounded by warmth and inclusion instead of the careful distance she and Jonah had maintained. Jonah visited daily, working the ranch alongside the hired hands Tom had brought on temporarily. He and Lydia fell into a new rhythm, working together during the day, sharing meals with the family, then going their separate ways at night. It was different, but not bad, and Lydia found she could appreciate the change while still cherishing what they'd built together. The town's response to the new arrangement was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. The whispers that had never quite died completely simply stopped. Lydia living with a proper family while Jonah worked the ranch as Tom's partner was respectable, understandable, exactly the kind of situation people could support without reservation. At the next church social, Mrs. Hartwell actually approached Lydia with something resembling approval. "I'm pleased to see you've been placed in a more appropriate situation," she said stiffly. "Mrs. Whitmore is an excellent influence." Lydia bit back the retort that wanted to escape and managed a polite smile instead. "She's been very kind." The 12-month review that fall was a formality. Judge Hendricks reviewed the updated living arrangements, noted Lydia's continued progress and the community's full acceptance, and renewed the guardianship with barely a question. Caleb didn't even bother attending. "I think we're finally done with courtrooms," Mr. Morse said afterward. "Barring any disasters, the judge won't require further reviews. You're officially off his calendar." It felt like emerging from a long tunnel into sunlight. The legal battles were over. The community had accepted them. The questions about propriety and suitability had been answered definitively. They were free to simply live their lives without the constant weight of judgment and scrutiny. 2 years passed with surprising speed. Lydia grew into herself, becoming a capable young woman who could manage ranch operations with quiet competence, navigate social situations with grace, and think independently about her future. She developed a reputation in town for practical medical knowledge, and people often sought her advice on minor ailments for both livestock and family members. Tom recovered enough to walk with a cane and manage light work, though the heavy lifting remained beyond him. The partnership with Jonah flourished, the combined ranch becoming one of the most productive in the county. Emma and Lydia remained close friends, their shared household creating a sisterhood neither had experienced before. Jonah remained Jonah, quiet, steady, present without being overbearing. He and Lydia maintained their special connection, the bond forged on that orphan train platform still strong despite the changes in their circumstances. They still had their talks, still shared the comfortable silences that came with deep understanding, still trusted each other absolutely. On Lydia's 16th birthday, Jonah appeared at the Whitmore
This story
house
was
with a
posted on the
package wrapped in
channel The
brown
Rusty
paper.
Saddle.
"For you,"
Please do not
he said
repost it
simply,
in any
handing
form.
it over. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a small wooden box. Lydia opened the box first and found a key. "What's this?" "Key to the cabin. It's legally yours now. I had the deed transferred. Figured you might want it someday, either to live in yourself or to do whatever you want with it." He gestured to the ledger. "And that's your portion of this year's ranch profits. You've been working this operation same as me. Only fair, you get paid for it." Lydia stared at the ledger, at the neat columns of numbers representing actual money, her money, earned through her own work. "Jonah, this is too much. It's exactly right. You're 16 now, old enough to start building your own future. In 2 years, you'll be legal age and able to make your own decisions about where you live, what you do, who you become. This gives you options, means you're not dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill." He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. "Means you can choose your path because you want it, not because you have no other choice." She understood what he was really saying. He'd given her the tools to be free, free to stay, free to go, free to build whatever life she wanted. The cabin was security, the money was possibility, and both were gifts of trust and respect. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for choosing me when nobody else would, for fighting for me, for teaching me to stand on my own feet. You did the hard part. I just pointed you in the right direction." He pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "One more thing. Letter came for you yesterday. From Boston." Lydia's hands trembled as she opened it. She hadn't heard from anyone in Boston since her mother's death 4 years ago. Inside was a single page in unfamiliar handwriting. "Dear Miss Hale, my name is Catherine Brennan. I was your mother's closest friend before her death. I've spent years trying to find you, following the orphan train records through various agencies. I recently learned you were placed in Redemption Creek, Wyoming, and I wanted to reach out. Your mother spoke of you often with tremendous love and pride. She wanted you to know that her death was not your fault, that she never regretted a single moment of raising you alone, and that she believed you were destined for remarkable things. I have some of her personal effects that I've kept for you: letters, photographs, a few pieces of jewelry. If you're willing, I would like to send them to you. Please write back if you wish to receive them. With warm regards, Catherine Brennan." Lydia read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had spoken of her with love, had believed in her, had wanted her to know she was valued even in death. Jonah put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Good news or bad?" "Good. Complicated, but good." She folded the letter carefully. "A connection to my mother, to who I was before the train." "You going to write back?" "Yes. I want those letters, those photographs. I want to remember her properly, instead of through the fog of grief." Lydia looked up at him. "Is that all right, reaching back to Boston?" "Lydia, you don't need my permission to connect with your past. That's part of your story, part of who you are. Honoring that doesn't take anything away from what you've built here." He squeezed her shoulder. "Write to her. Get your mother's things. Learn about where you came from. It'll only make you more certain about where you're going." She did write back, and 6 weeks later a package arrived containing photographs of a smiling woman Lydia barely remembered, letters written in her mother's elegant hand, and a silver locket containing a tiny portrait of Lydia as a child. Catherine Brennan's letter accompanying the items told stories of Lydia's mother, her kindness, her strength, her fierce determination to give her daughter every opportunity despite their poverty. "She worked herself to death providing for you," Catherine wrote, "but she did it with joy, not resentment. She wanted you to have chances she never had, to become someone remarkable. I think she'd be so proud of the young woman you've become." Lydia wore the locket every day, the weight of it against her chest a reminder of 2 kinds of love: the love that had given her life, and the love that had given her a future. The final 12-month review came when Lydia was 17, just months away from legal adulthood. Judge Hendricks had aged noticeably in the years since their first hearing. His hair pure white now, his movements slower, but his mind remained sharp and his sense of fairness intact. He reviewed the documentation perfunctorily, clearly just going through required motions. "Miss Hale, you're nearly 18. In a few months, this guardianship will end automatically. Do you have plans for your future?" Lydia had been thinking about little else for months. "I'm considering attending the Territorial Teaching College in Cheyenne. Mrs. Whitmore has been helping me prepare for the entrance examinations. If I'm accepted, I'll study to become a teacher." "Admirable goal. And you, Mr. Ryder? How do you feel about Miss Hale's plans?" Jonah smiled with unmistakable pride. "I think she'll make an excellent teacher. She's patient, knowledgeable, and good at explaining complex ideas simply. The world needs more teachers like that." Indeed, Judge Hendricks made a final notation in his file. "Well, I see no reason to continue these reviews. The guardianship stands until Miss Hale's 18th birthday, at which point it dissolves automatically, unless there are any final concerns." He looked between them, eyebrows raised. "No concerns, Your Honor," Jonah said. "Your just gratitude for your fairness through this whole process. I merely applied the law as it should be applied, with sense and attention to actual welfare, rather than speculation and prejudice." The judge closed the file with finality. "Miss Hale, I wish you every success in your future endeavors. Mr. Ryder, you've done well by this child. That's all any guardian can hope to achieve." Walking out of the courthouse for what they both knew would be the last time, Lydia felt a strange mix of relief and melancholy. This chapter was ending. Soon she'd be legally adult, free to chart her own course without anyone's permission or oversight. Scared? Jonah asked, reading her expression. A little. Excited, too. She looked up at the Wyoming sky, brilliant blue and endless. Everything's changing. Everything's always changing. That's the nature of life. He offered his arm and she took it, the gesture familiar and comfortable. But some things stay constant. You'll always have a home here if you want it. Always have family who cares what happens to you. College, career, whatever path you choose, you're not walking it alone unless you want to. I know. And she did know, bone deep and certain. She'd been picked last on that platform, but she'd been picked by someone who'd never once regretted the choice, never once made her feel like a burden or an obligation. Jonah had given her everything she needed to fly and the security to know she had a place to land. Lydia took the teaching college entrance examination on a crisp October morning 3 weeks after her 18th birthday. She'd studied for months, working through mathematics and literature and history with Mrs. Whitmore's patient guidance and Jonah's practical insights. When the results arrived 6 weeks later, her hands shook so badly, Emma had to open the envelope. "You're in!" Emma shrieked, reading the acceptance letter. "Lydia, you're in!" The celebration that evening included both families, plus neighbors who'd become friends over the years. Tom raised a toast to Lydia's success, his voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Whitmore cried happy tears while planning what Lydia would need for dormitory living. Emma demanded promises of letters and visits. Jonah said nothing during the party, but later, when the guests had departed and the house had quieted, he found Lydia on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You did it," he said simply, settling onto the steps beside her. "We did it. I couldn't have gotten here without you." "Sure you could have. Maybe not this exact path, but you'd have found your way. You've got your mother's determination and your own particular brand of stubborn wisdom." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you, Lydia. Not just because you got into college, but because of who you've become. Strong, capable, kind. Everything I hoped for when I raised my hand on that platform." "Why did you?" The question had lived in her heart for 5 years, never quite finding voice. "Really? You said I reminded you of yourself, but there were other kids on that train. Why me?" Jonah considered his answer carefully. "You know how sometimes you just know something? Can't explain it, can't rationalize it, but it's true all the same. That's what happened when I saw you sitting there. I looked at you and I knew, this one needs me and maybe I need her too. Didn't have language for it then, don't really have it now, but it was the surest thing I've ever felt. I needed you." Lydia's voice was thick. "I needed exactly you, someone who saw me, who didn't try to make me into something I wasn't, who gave me space to grow into myself. If anyone else had chosen me, I don't think I'd be here right now. Maybe, maybe not. But I'm grateful it was me. These 5 years, watching you transform from that hollow-eyed girl on the platform into the woman sitting beside me now, it's been the most meaningful thing I've ever done. More meaningful than building the ranch, more meaningful
This story
than
was
any
posted
success
on
I
the
could
channel
point
The
to.
Rusty Saddle.
You,
Please do
Lydia,
not
you're
repost
what I'll
it in
be
any
proudest
form.
of when I'm old and looking back on my life. She leaned against his shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing. "I'll come back. After college. I'll teach somewhere nearby, come home for holidays and summers. You're not getting rid of me just because I'm legal age now." Didn't figure I would. "But Lydia, I want you to know, if you don't come back, that's all right too. If you find opportunities elsewhere, build a life in some city or different territory, I'll understand. My job was to give you the tools to choose your own path. Wherever that path leads is up to you. It leads back here. Maybe not immediately, maybe not permanently, but this is home. Your home. That doesn't change just because I'm spreading my wings." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one against the vast prairie darkness. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed their evening song. Closer, the creak of the porch swing where Emma and her father sat talking. The sounds of home, of family, of belonging. Lydia left for Cheyenne in January, bundled against bitter cold and loaded down with supplies, advice, and more love than she'd ever imagined possible. The whole town turned out to see her off, a far cry from the suspicious stares and whispered disapproval of 5 years earlier. Mrs. Hartwell even gave her a Bible with her name embossed in gold, the closest thing to an apology the woman would ever manage. Jonah drove her to the train station, the same platform where she'd been passed over by family after family so many years before. But everything was different now. She wasn't being shipped away as an unwanted burden. She was embarking on a future she'd earned and chosen. "Right when you can," Jonah said, loading her trunk onto the train. "Let us know how you're settling in." "I will, every week." She hugged him fiercely. "Thank you for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for fighting for me when it would have been easier to give up, for believing I was worth the trouble. You were never trouble. You were possibility." He pulled back his weathered hands on her shoulders. "Now go show that college what we've known all along, that you're capable of remarkable things." She boarded the train, found a seat by the window, and watched Redemption Creek recede into the distance. But this time there were no tears, no hollow desperation, no fear of an uncertain future. This time she was traveling towards something instead of away from everything. The years that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Lydia excelled at the teaching college, graduated with honors, and accepted a position at a small school 20 miles from Redemption Creek. She taught children to read and write and think critically, influenced young minds the way her mother and Jonah had influenced hers. She remained close with the Whitmores, visited the ranch regularly, maintained the cabin Jonah had given her as both retreat and reminder of where she'd come from. She watched Emma marry a good man from the next county, helped Mrs. Whitmore through Tom's eventual death from heart failure, stood beside Jonah as age slowly caught up with his weathered frame. On her 25th birthday, sitting in the cabin that had saved her life 10 years earlier, Lydia opened her journal and wrote a final entry about that day on the platform. "I spent years believing I was nobody's first choice, that I was the girl everyone passed over, the unwanted remainder. But I understand now that being chosen last by the right person was infinitely better than being chosen first by anyone else. Jonah saw something in me I didn't see in myself, potential, worth, possibility. He gave me not just a home, but the tools to build my own future. And in teaching me to stand on my own feet, he gave me the greatest gift possible. The freedom to choose to stay near him, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Some people spend their whole lives searching for family. I found mine on a dusty Wyoming platform when a quiet cowboy raised his hand and chose me. Everything good in my life grew from that single moment of being seen, of being valued, of being chosen. And I will carry that gift forward by seeing, valuing, and choosing others the way he chose me." She closed the journal, looked around the small cabin that held so many memories, and smiled. Outside, the Wyoming prairie stretched endless and beautiful under a summer sky. Somewhere on that prairie, Jonah was working the ranch he'd built through determination and integrity. Nearby, the Whitmores were going about their daily routines. In her classroom, students were learning and growing and becoming their own remarkable selves. Lydia Hale had been the last girl chosen on an orphan train platform. But she'd been chosen by exactly the right person at exactly the right moment, and that choice had changed everything. She'd transformed from unwanted to invaluable, from overlooked to essential, from forgotten to unforgettable. And it had all started with 3 simple words spoken into the dust and disappointment of that summer day so long ago. Her. I'll take her. The words that had given her life. The choice that had made her family. The moment when everything changed because one quiet man decided a small, hollow-eyed girl deserved a chance. She'd been chosen last, but she'd been chosen completely. And that made all the difference in the world.